That can't be her. Caleb Hardin said it out loud before he could stop himself, standing 40 yards from the stage letter crushed in his fist, every careful plan he'd made for the rest of his life dissolving in the October dust. He'd written one word to that agency, plain, underlined it twice, signed his name, and meant every syllable. The woman stepping off that coach wasn't plain. She was the kind of trouble a man didn't recover from, and she was already looking straight at him like she'd known exactly what she was walking into and had come anyway. If you want to know what happens next, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss a single moment. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. Now let's find out if Caleb Hardin's worst mistake just walked off that stage or his last chance. The stage rolled into Redstone Creek at 2:30 on a Thursday in late October 1878, and Caleb Hardin stood at the edge of the platform crowd with his hat pulled low, his arms crossed, and the absolute bone-deep certainty that he had made a catastrophic mistake. He'd written that letter to the Kansas City agency on a Tuesday night after 3 whiskeys and 6 months of fence posts and silence. He hadn't been looking for a wife. He'd been looking for a solution. The ranch needed 2 people to run it. Desmond Pike, his nearest neighbor, had told him that plainly enough last spring while leaning on a fence rail watching Caleb try to do 3 men's work before noon. "You're going to grind yourself to nothing," Desmond had said. "You need help." Caleb hadn't argued. He'd just gone inside and poured himself another drink. The agency letter arrived 6 weeks later with 3 names and 3 short descriptions. He'd chosen Nora Shaw because her file said daughter of a frontier physician, experienced in livestock care, accustomed to remote conditions, no family obligations requiring return, practical, no complications. He had not asked what she looked like. He had specifically, deliberately, with full intention, not asked. He was regretting that now. She was the last one off the stage. 2 drummers came first, then a cattle buyer from Denver with a sample case too big for a man who'd only planned to stay the week. Then an older couple who immediately spotted people they knew and made the kind of noise reunions make. The door hung open for a moment. Empty. And then Nora Shaw stepped down onto the dirt of Redstone Creek. The entire platform went quiet. Not politely quiet. Not the quiet of people being respectful. The particular held breath quiet of every man on that platform simultaneously doing arithmetic he had no business doing. She wasn't wearing anything fancy. The gray coat was good quality but well worn at the cuffs. Her hair was pinned up beneath a practical felt hat. She carried her own bag without looking around for someone to take it from her. None of that mattered. What mattered was the way she stood, like she'd gotten off stages in 100 hard towns and hadn't been impressed by a single one of them and wasn't about to start now. Ruth Calloway materialized at Caleb's left elbow. Ruth ran the general store and had opinions about everything and everyone in Redstone Creek, and she shared them without being asked, which was a habit Caleb had never once thanked her for. "Well," Ruth said, eyes fixed on the platform, "that ain't what I expected." "Nobody asked you, Ruth." "Never do." She still didn't look away. "She's going to cause you nothing but trouble. Look at her. Woman like that doesn't belong on a working ranch. She belongs in a parlor somewhere marrying money." A pause. "Or she's running from something." Caleb didn't answer. Both possibilities had already occurred to him, and neither one made him feel better about the next 30 years. He pushed through the small crowd and stopped 6 feet from her. She saw him coming, and she waited, not backing up, not smiling, not performing any of the social niceness a woman in her position might reasonably perform. Just watching him with dark brown eyes that took inventory the way his old Wells Fargo training had taught him to take inventory. Fast. Thorough. Revealing nothing back. "Miss Shaw," he said. "Mr. Hardin." Her voice was steady and slightly lower than he'd expected. "I'd know you anywhere. The agency described you well." "I imagine they did." He glanced at the bag in her hand, then back at her face. "I need to say something before we go any further." "Then say it." He pulled the folded letter from his coat pocket. I wrote this agency asking for someone suited to ranch labor. Hard winters, isolation, no comforts worth mentioning. He stopped, started again. I want to make sure you understand what you agreed to come to. She tilted her head just slightly. Are you telling me the job is different from what was described, or are you telling me you think I can't do it? I'm telling you, I have a small house, one hired hand who quits every winter cattle that need constant attention, and a neighbor who will want to mind my business from the moment you arrive. He kept his voice level. I'm not telling you what you can or can't do. I don't know you well enough for that. No, she agreed. You don't. Behind Caleb, somebody laughed. He recognized the voice before he turned Jake Puit from the livery, a man who'd never been shy about saying what he thought and had never once been thanked for that either. Caleb Hardin. Jake called out loud enough for the whole platform to enjoy. You ordered a plow horse, and they sent you a thoroughbred. The laughter that followed was the kind that spreads whether people want it to or not. Caleb didn't turn around. He watched Nora Shaw's face instead. Something crossed it. Not embarrassment, not anger. Something older and colder and more exhausted than either of those, the expression of a person hearing a joke they've heard 500 times and are completely finished pretending is funny. Mr. Puit. She raised her voice without raising her register, addressing the platform behind Caleb without looking away from Caleb. I've been on that stage for 11 hours. I'm tired. I'm hungry. And I have considerably more important things to do than educate grown men on basic courtesy. She picked up her bag. If you have something useful to contribute to this conversation, I'm listening. If you don't, then we're done here. Dead silence on the platform. Ruth Calloway made a sound that might have been a laugh rapidly converted into a cough. Caleb looked at the woman in front of him for 3 full seconds. Then he reached out and took the bag from her hand. My wagon's out front, he said. We can talk on the road. She let him take the bag. That surprised him. He'd half expected her to fight him for it. There's a trunk on top of the coach, she said. The smaller one with the leather straps. I see it. He retrieved the trunk, loaded both pieces into the wagon bed, and came around to find her already seated on the bench with her hat in her lap, and her hands folded and her eyes on the mountains to the west, like the circus behind them was already forgotten, and she'd moved on to whatever came next. He climbed up, took the reins, and they pulled out of Redstone Creek with what felt like the entire town watching, and not a word between them until the buildings fell away and the road opened into open range. You've been ranching long, she asked. 7 years. Before that, Wells Fargo, detective work. Valuable skill set for a frontier rancher. I thought so at the time. She was quiet for a moment. The wagon creaked. Wind moved through the sage. Then she said, The agency told me you lost a child. His hands tightened on the reins so fast the horses felt it and shifted. That's not something I need discussed. I'm not discussing it. I'm acknowledging it. Her voice hadn't changed by a fraction. My father was a frontier physician for 30 years. I've been in rooms where people lost children, and I've watched other people avoid the subject like it's contagious. She looked straight ahead. I don't avoid things. I find it wastes time. Caleb looked at her sideways. She was still watching the mountains. Your file said your father was a doctor. Was. I worked with him from the time I was 12 until I was 22. He died of fever 3 years ago. I'm sorry. Thank you. She said it without sentiment. Not cold, just honest. He was a good man and a better physician. I learned everything he knew, which is relevant to your situation, by the way, if you'll let it be. He frowned. What do you mean? Your nearest physician is Dr. Hendricks in Redstone Creek. I passed his office on the way through. His assistant told the stage driver that Hendricks is out of town 6 months of every year visiting family in Ohio. She glanced at him. Cattle ranching is physical work. Accidents happen, infections happen, difficult livestock deliveries happen. If something goes wrong on your property, you're 20 miles from medical care. And I have my father's medical bag. 10 years of practical experience with everything from broken bones to infected wounds. I'm telling you this because the agency probably listed it as a minor qualification. She held his gaze. It isn't minor, it's significant. He stared at the trail ahead of them for a moment. You talk a lot. When there's something worth saying. A pause. The rest of the time I'm quiet. You'll find that out. I imagine I will. The silence that followed was different from the one before it. Less sharp. Not comfortable yet, but working toward something. The agency also mentioned, Nora said carefully, that you've had some difficulties with a land matter. A company from Denver making inquiries about purchase. Caleb went very still. That wasn't in my letter to the agency. No. But it was mentioned in the county records included in the background file the agency prepares for candidates. She turned to face him directly for the first time since they'd left town. A man named Gerald Voss filed 2 land inquiries against your property boundary in the last 18 months. Both were dismissed, but the filings themselves are unusual. The legal language used is identical in both documents, word for word. Where did you read county records? Kansas City. The agency provides background on properties candidates are being sent to. A pause. Most women don't read them carefully. And you? I read everything carefully. He'd spent 6 months watching Voss's men ride his fence line at distances just far enough to claim they were on public land. 6 months of veiled conversations in town, polite letters from Denver attorneys, and the quiet, suffocating pressure of a man with money and patience, and no particular hurry. Caleb had told no one the full shape of what he suspected, because he had no proof, and because, in his experience, men like Voss counted on your silence. You read a land filing, Caleb said slowly, and decided to come anyway. I read a land filing and decided the situation required someone useful. She turned back to the road. I told you I'm not here for an easy life. The ranch appeared around the last bend as the sun started dropping behind the Rockies. Caleb watched her face instead of the land. She leaned forward slightly on the bench, not reaching out, not performing admiration, just looking at the property with the focused attention of someone taking a true measure of something. Those horses in the south paddock, she said. Your breeding stock. Yes. Why is the gray mare favoring her right front? See how she's shifting her weight. She leaned slightly forward. She's been doing that for at least 2 days based on her stance. That's muscle compensation, not a momentary adjustment. He looked. She was right. He'd been so occupied with the north fence line all week, he hadn't done a proper check of the paddock. He didn't say anything. Also, she continued, your water trough near the barn is cracked on the east side. It's losing pressure slowly. In another week it'll empty overnight, and you won't know why until morning. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in the yard and sat there. How did you see all that from a moving wagon? My father taught me to look at everything, she said. He said a physician who only looks at what he's called to look at misses half the information in the room. She climbed down from the bench without waiting for his hand. Where do I sleep? The house was 2 rooms. He'd known that was going to be a problem from the moment the wagon pulled into the yard, and the full smallness of the place was impossible to ignore. He'd spent 2 full days cleaning it, and it was still rough and cold, and plainly the home of a man who'd stopped caring about his surroundings some years back, and hadn't found a reason to start again. There's 1 bedroom, he said. I'll take the barn. She turned from the doorway and looked at him. You'll do no such thing. It's October in Colorado. She looked back at the room with practical eyes. Build a partition if it bothers you, or hang a blanket or set up a cot in the main room. I don't particularly care which. What I care about is whether there's work to be done before dark. There was always work before dark. He'd expected complaints about the house. He'd expected at minimum a visible swallowing of disappointment, some acknowledgement of the distance between what the agency had described and what she was actually looking at. Margaret had stood in this same doorway 7 years ago and said quietly, and finally, Caleb, I can't live like this. I just can't. He'd heard those words so many times since in the back of his own skull that they'd become a kind of permanent weather, Nora Shaw looked at this house like she was calculating what it needed, not mourning what it lacked. "The gray mare first," she said, pulling off her coat and hanging it on the hook beside the door like she'd done it 100 times before. "Then the water trough. Then we talk about what needs doing and in what order." He followed her out to the paddock and watched her move along the fence toward the gray mare with her hands open and her body low, approaching the animal with a calm that horses recognized and responded to immediately. She ran her hands down the mare's right leg from shoulder to hoof, slow and thorough. The horse stood for all of it. "Stone bruise," she said. "Not serious yet. Could become serious if she keeps working on it. She needs 3 days off the ground and cold compresses on the hoof." She stood and looked at Caleb. "You work her hard. She's a breeding mare. I don't ride her. She may have kicked something in the paddock or stepped wrong on rock. I'll check her again in the morning." She stepped back, giving the mare room. "If the bruising has spread, we may need to poultice it." Caleb stood in his own paddock in the last light of a Colorado afternoon, watching this woman he'd met 4 hours ago discuss his horse's hoof with the calm authority of someone who'd done it 1,000 times and felt something shift in him that he didn't have a name for yet. Not attraction. Something quieter than that and more unsettling. Like a door he'd sealed shut years ago had developed a crack he hadn't noticed until air started coming through. He killed the feeling before it could form. "The trough," he said. "Right." They worked until dark. She didn't slow him down. She didn't need instruction. When the trough repair required holding an iron brace in place while he hammered, she held it without being asked, without adjusting, without letting go, until he told her it was done. When a fence post near the barn gate needed resetting, she was already testing the others down the line before he'd finished the first one. Dinner was beans cornbread and the last of the preserved venison from September. He cooked it because he always cooked, and because he wasn't sure what else to do, and she sat at the rough table and ate without complaint and asked him about the winter feed situation and the cattle count and the condition of the north pasture. She had a small notebook that appeared from her coat pocket. She wrote things down while he talked. "You keep records of everything?" he asked. "How else do you know what you have?" She looked up. "How do you track expenditures currently?" "In my head." She looked at him for a moment, not judging, diagnosing. "That works up to a point. Past a certain complexity, it starts losing you money." She went back to her notes. "I'll set up a ledger this week." "I didn't ask you to do that." "I know." She kept writing. "I'm going to do it anyway because it'll help us both. If that bothers you, tell me now." "It doesn't bother me," he said before he decided to say it. After dinner, he hung a blanket down the center of the bedroom doorway, using 2 nails and a length of rope. They said goodnight with 4 feet of wool between them, and Caleb lay on his side of the room in the dark, listening to the Colorado wind come off the mountains, thinking about a woman who had been here 6 hours and had already fixed his mare, found his trough leak, started a ledger, and identified something about Voss's legal filings that Caleb had stared at for 18 months without once seeing. He thought about Margaret saying, "I can't live like this." He thought about the way Nora Shaw had hung her coat on his hook like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't sleep for a long time. The next morning she was up before him. He heard the stove before he was fully awake, the clank of the iron door, the pop of fresh wood catching. By the time he dressed and came into the main room, she had coffee on and was at the table with her notebook open and his property map found somewhere in the stack of papers near the window, smoothed flat in front of her and covered in careful pencil marks. "You have 340 acres you're not using," she said without looking up. "The northwest section is too rocky." "Did you walk it this year?" He paused. "Last year." She looked up. "Things change. Rocky ground shifts after heavy snowmelt. You may have water sources up there you don't know about." She turned the map toward him. "I want to ride it today. We've got fence work on the east line." "We do both." She held his gaze. "You take the east line. I ride northwest. We cover twice the ground and compare notes this evening." He thought about telling her no. thought about explaining that he ran this operation on his own terms and had done so for 7 years without commentary. Then he thought about the trough he hadn't noticed, the mare he hadn't checked, and the land filing pattern he hadn't seen. "Fine," he said. "Be back before dark." "I will." She took a long drink of coffee, set down the cup, and looked at him across the table. "One more thing." "What?" "Gerald Voss." She set the cup down with precision. "His next move will come through the county surveyor's office. That's the pattern. 2 informal inquiries to establish a record, then a formal survey request that starts the legal process for disputed boundary claims." She looked at him steadily. "He's not trying to buy your land, Mr. Hardin. He's trying to build a legal argument that part of it was never yours. There's a significant difference." The cold was back in his chest. "How do you know land dispute law?" A pause. Just long enough to tell him something landed behind it. "Because Edmund Cross, the man I was engaged to in St. Louis, was a lawyer who specialized in exactly this kind of property acquisition, on behalf of railroad and mining interests." She said the name without flinching, but something in her jaw tightened for just a moment, brief and controlled. "I spent 8 months watching him prepare the same filings against a family in Jefferson County before I understood what I was actually seeing." She paused. "I understand it now." She rode out at dawn on the bay gelding he'd saddled for her without being asked, and Caleb watched her go from the barn doorway with a cup of coffee cooling in his hand and the uneasy feeling of a man who has just let something important out of his sight. He told himself it was practical concern. She didn't know the Northwest terrain. The ground up there was unpredictable after a wet summer, soft in places that looked solid. He should have sent Desmond with her. He told himself all of that, drank the rest of his cold coffee, and went to fix the east fence. She was back before noon. He heard the gelding before he saw her coming around the far side of the barn at a pace that meant something. He straightened from the fence post and watched her dismount in the yard. Even from 40 feet away, he could read the tension in her shoulders. "There's a man on your northwest line," she said, reaching him. "Civilian clothes, no badge. He had a surveying rod and a transit level. I watched him for 20 minutes before he noticed me." Caleb set down his post driver slowly. "What did he do when he saw you?" He packed his equipment very calmly, tipped his hat, and rode north. She held out the gelding's reins. "He wasn't hiding. He was working like a man who had every right to be there. He didn't. But the way he moved, he's been on that ground before. He knew exactly where he was going." She looked at him directly. "This wasn't a first visit, Caleb." The cold thing settled in his chest again, the one that had been living there since the first letter from Voss's attorneys arrived 18 months ago. He'd described it to no one because there was no one to describe it to. The cold of a man who knows something is coming and still can't see the full shape of it. "Did you get a good look at him? Brown coat, black hat, gray horse, stocky build, maybe 45? She reached into her coat and pulled out the notebook. "He had a company mark on his saddlebag. I couldn't read the full name, but it started with a V." "Voss." "Of course it did." She opened the notebook to a page covered in measurements and compass bearings, sketched from memory with a precision that stopped him cold. "He was operating inside your northwest boundary. Based on your property map, he was at least 80 yards inside your legal line. I noted the position of his transit against the rock formation at the ridge. I can show you exactly where he was standing." Caleb looked at the notebook page, then he looked at her. "You carry a compass. Always." She said it like it was the most obvious fact in the world. "My father navigated freight routes. I learned compass work at 14. She met his eyes. "Caleb, he's not doing a boundary inquiry anymore. He's building evidence for a disputed survey. If he files a surveyor's report showing a discrepancy between your recorded boundaries and physical landmarks, Voss's attorneys have grounds to petition for boundary adjustment, which moves his access to the water table, which gives him the northern creek feed. Without it, his mining operation can't expand." She didn't finish the next sentence. She didn't need to. Caleb stood in his own yard on a cold October morning and understood with a clarity that had been missing for 18 months exactly what Gerald Voss was building. Not a purchase. A legal dismemberment. A slow, documented, technically irreproachable theft conducted inside a courthouse instead of at gunpoint. "I need to go to town," he said. "We need to go to town," she said. "And before you tell me to stay here, I know more about the specific legal mechanism he's using than anyone else in Redstone Creek. You'll want me in that conversation." He wanted to argue. He found he couldn't build one that held up. "Can you be ready in 10 minutes?" "I'm already ready," she said. Wade Loomis kept his office at the end of Main Street in a building that had started life as feed storage and still smelled like it. He was behind his desk when Caleb and Nora walked in, and his face did what faces did when they'd been hoping not to be visited. "Caleb." Loomis stood. His eyes moved to Nora. "Ma'am." "Sheriff." Nora sat down without being invited. "We need to talk about a surveyor operating on Mr. Hardin's northwest property line this morning. Uninvited and unannounced." Loomis looked at Caleb. "You sure he was on your land?" "She took compass bearings," Caleb said. Loomis blinked. He looked at Nora again, and Caleb could see the man recalibrating, adjusting whatever category he'd initially filed her under. "I documented his position against the ridge formation at the northwest corner," Nora said. She placed the open notebook on Loomis's desk without asking permission. "That formation is 40 yards inside Mr. Hardin's recorded boundary. The surveyor was operating approximately 80 yards inside that line. He was carrying a Voss Mining Company saddlebag." Loomis sat back down slowly. "Voss has legal counsel. Those 2 inquiry requests were dismissed because they were procedurally premature," Nora said. "A formal surveyor's report changes that. If Voss files a survey showing a discrepancy between recorded boundaries and physical landmarks, he can petition for judicial review of the original land claim." She looked at Loomis steadily. "Sheriff, I understand you're in a difficult position. Voss is a significant economic presence in this territory. I'm not asking you to take a stand against him today. I'm asking you to formally record what I've told you, so that when this reaches a territorial judge, there is documented evidence that this survey was conducted without permission and potentially with fraudulent intent." "Pishtim?" "Eminage." Loomis stared at her for a long moment. "Who are you exactly?" "Nora Shaw." A beat. "I'm going to be Nora Hardin shortly." She said it without looking at Caleb, completely matter of fact. And Caleb felt the words land in his chest like a stone dropped into still water, slow and spreading, and impossible to stop. Loomis looked at Caleb. Caleb gave him nothing. The sheriff pulled a ledger from his desk drawer and uncapped his pen. "Tell me the exact time and position," he said. "No." They were back on this road home before Loomis had fully absorbed what had just happened. Caleb drove the first 2 miles in silence, trying to name the feeling that had settled over him. It wasn't relief. Relief was too simple. It was something more complicated, what it felt like to watch someone walk into a difficult room and know exactly where to stand. "You've done that before," he said. "Done what?" "Walked into a room full of men who didn't want you there and made them do what you came for." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "In St. Louis, when I found out what Edmund was doing, I went to the county attorney's office with the documents I'd found. I sat in a waiting room for 4 hours before they'd see me. When they finally let me in, the attorney told me that a woman's interpretation of legal filings was not admissible as evidence and suggested I was perhaps confused about what I'd read." She said all of it in the same even tone she used for fence posts and feed schedules. "I went home and made a complete copy of every document. Then I went to a rival firm that Edmund had undercut in a previous case. I showed them what I had explained what it meant and asked what they would do with it if they had standing to act on it. What did they do? They investigated. Found 3 other families Edmund had defrauded using the same template. They built a case." A pause. "It wasn't enough to convict him. His family had money and the right judges. But it was enough to end his career in St. Louis." He's in Chicago now, apparently doing the same thing. Caleb looked at the road. I'm sorry that happened to you. Are you? She turned to look at him, and for the first time her face showed something underneath the practical surface. Not cold, not composed, just deeply privately tired. Most people who say that actually mean they're sorry I brought it up. I mean, I'm sorry it happened, he said. Not sorry you told me. There's a difference. She was quiet long enough that he thought she'd let it go. Then she said, yes, there is. They didn't speak again until the ranch came into view, but this silence was different from the ones before it. It had lost its edges. Desmond Pike was waiting at the gate when they pulled in. Desmond didn't make social calls. He never arrived without a reason. He was leaning on a fence post with his hat pushed back and the particular expression he wore when he'd heard something he didn't want to have to repeat. Des, Caleb said, climbing down. What is it? Got a visit this morning. Man from Denver. Desmond looked at the ground, then back up. Gerald Voss himself, not his lawyers. Came to my place first, asked if I knew your situation. Asked if I'd be interested in a cooperative land arrangement with a mining company looking to develop water access in this valley. He spat in the dirt. I told him I wasn't interested. He smiled and said he understood, and that he was sure things would work out one way or another. What does that mean? Nora said. Desmond looked at her the careful look of a man reassessing someone in real time. I think it means he's moving faster than he planned. Why would he move faster? Because somebody filed a report at the county office this morning, before you got there. Desmond pulled a folded paper from his coat. Jake Pruitt brought this out. His cousin works the county desk. Said a man came in first thing and filed a formal surveyor's report claiming a boundary discrepancy on hardened land. He held it out. Filed at 8:15, before any of us were awake and thinking clearly. Caleb took the paper. He read it once, read it again. The language was identical to what Nora had described from the St. Louis filings. The specific framework, the precise legal vocabulary of a template used more than once by the same hands. He handed it to Nora without a word. She read it standing in the yard in the cold afternoon light. Her expression didn't change, but he watched her jaw tighten in that small, controlled way he was already learning to read. He had this ready, she said. He was waiting for the right moment to file it. The surveyor this morning was the final piece he needed a field report to attach to the petition. She looked up. He's asking for judicial review of your original land claim. The hearing will be scheduled within 60 days. 60 days, Caleb said. If we don't respond with counter-documentation, by then, the review proceeds without opposition. She folded the paper carefully and handed it back. We need a land attorney. From Denver or Colorado Springs. Someone outside Voss's immediate reach. I can't afford a Denver attorney. You can't afford to lose your water access either. She met his eyes directly. No softness, no evasion. How much do you have in reserve? He almost said that was none of her business. He looked at her face and decided against it. Enough for a hard winter and not much beyond. She nodded slowly, taking that in without visible reaction. Then she turned to Desmond. The other ranches in this valley, how many are dealing with similar pressure from Voss? And Desmond scratched the back of his neck. Heard the Aldrich family got a purchase offer they didn't ask for last spring. The Beaumont place had some fence trouble nobody could explain. Old man Garrett lost 20 head last fall, blamed mountain cats, but the timing was strange. It's never one family, Nora said. And there was something in her voice that wasn't anger, but was the thing that lives just before anger in a person who's learned to keep anger useful. It's never isolated. Men like Voss don't take on one opponent. They pressure the whole landscape simultaneously, so everyone thinks they're standing alone. She looked at Desmond. Can you ride to the Aldrich place tomorrow? I can. Don't tell him everything yet. Don't give him details that could reach Voss through loose talk. Just ask what he's experienced. Let him talk first. Desmond studied her for a moment. I've been listening to ranchers for 30 years, he said. Reckon I can manage. After Desmond rode out, they stood in the yard in the early dark, the mountains going black against a sky still pale in the west. Caleb looked at the paper in his hand and felt the full weight of 7 years of building something carefully and watching it be methodically surrounded by a man with lawyers and money and no particular conscience. "I need you to understand something," he said. Nora waited. "I've been fighting this alone because I didn't think I had a choice. I've been losing slowly without making noise." He folded the paper careful and deliberate the same way she'd folded it. "I don't know how to do what you're doing. The thinking 3 steps ahead. The legal language. Walking into Loomis's office and making him open a ledger he's been keeping closed for 6 months." He looked at her. "I don't know how to do that." "I know," she said. "No comfort in it. No condescension, just a fact." "So why are you still here?" The question came out quieter than he intended. The real question, the one that had been sitting at the back of his skull since the moment she'd walked into his kitchen at dawn with a notebook and his property map, and the settled air of someone who had made a decision and wasn't revisiting it. Nora looked at him for a long moment. The wind moved between them cold off the high peaks, carrying the first smell of coming snow. "Because this is a problem I know how to fight," she said. "And I'm tired of walking away from things I know how to fight." She held his gaze. "And because you asked for plain and practical and someone without complications, and what you actually need is someone who understands exactly the kind of trouble you're in." A pause. "I'm not what you asked for, but I might be what you need. Those aren't always the same thing." Caleb Hardin stood in the dark yard of the ranch he'd built out of loss and stubbornness, and 7 years of refusing to quit, and looked at the woman who had been here 3 days, and had already seen more of his situation than he'd let anyone see in all that time, and felt that wall crack a little further. He didn't have words for it yet, but he didn't look away either. "Snow's coming," Nora said, looking at the sky. "By morning." "Then we'd better get the horses in." "I'll take the gelding. You get the mare." She turned toward the barn. "And tomorrow we ride to the Aldrich place together. You'll need someone there who's heard Voss's arguments before." He watched her walk toward the barn, straight-backed, and certain in the early dark of a Colorado night, and thought for the first time in 7 years that maybe the worst thing that could have happened to him had just become something else entirely. He didn't know what yet. But the shape of it was changing. He went to get the mare. The snow came in the night the way trouble always did, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Caleb was up before it stopped falling, standing at the window with coffee he'd made by feel in the dark, watching the yard go white and still under 3 inches of early October snow that hadn't been in any forecast and didn't care. By the time Nora appeared from behind the bedroom blanket, dressed and pinning her hair back with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to difficult mornings, he already had the stove going and the horses checked. "How are the cattle?" she asked. "Moved the main herd to the south pasture last night before dark. They've got the windbreak." He set a cup on the table for her. "The Aldrich place is going to be slow going in this." "I know." She picked up the cup without sitting down. "We still go." He hadn't suggested otherwise. He just wanted to hear her say it. They rode out at 7. The world was white and hushed and cold enough to hurt, and Nora rode beside him without complaint, reading the ground the way she read everything carefully, without drama, without wasting a single word on the discomfort. Bill Aldrich was a lean, weathered man in his mid-50s who'd built his spread 20 years ago and wore the expression of someone who'd survived enough hard seasons to stop being surprised by them. He came to his door with a rifle he immediately lowered when he recognized Caleb, then looked at Nora with the careful assessment of a man who'd been alone long enough to be suspicious of the unexpected. "Bill," Caleb said, "this is Nora Shaw. She's—" A half-second pause, shorter than he expected it to be. "She's with me." Bill Aldrich looked at Nora for 3 full seconds. "You're the woman from the stage," he said. "I am. People in town are talking about you. People in town talk about everything." She met his eyes without flinching. "I'm more interested in what's happening on your land, Mr. Aldrich. Desmond Pike says you've had some difficulties." Bill looked at Caleb. Caleb gave him a small nod. "Come inside," Bill said. The next hour was one of the most important hours Caleb had spent in 7 years, and he spent most of it watching Nora listen. She didn't lead. She didn't correct. She didn't fill silences the way nervous people did. She asked one question at a time and let Bill Aldrich tell his story in the order it lived in his memory, which was not chronological and not always logical, but was completely honest. And by the end of it, she had 4 pages of notes, and Bill Aldrich had the careful, slightly dazed look of a man who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just set it down for the first time. "It's not just me," Bill said. Not a question. He'd been building to it since the second page. "It's not just you," Nora confirmed. "It's you and Caleb and the Beaumont place, and likely the Garrett Ranch. Possibly 2 more we haven't spoken to yet." She turned the notebook so he could see the timeline she'd built while he talked. "Look at the dates. Every incident happens on a rotating pattern, never the same property twice in a row. Designed to make each of you feel isolated and unlucky." Bill stared at the page. "Son of a—" He stopped himself, looked at Nora. "Beg your pardon, ma'am. I've heard worse." She tapped the notebook. "The purchase offer you received last spring. Do you still have that letter?" "Somewhere. Find it. I need the legal language it used." She looked at Caleb. "If it matches the template from Caleb's filings and the documents I have copies of in my medical bag." She said it without elaborating on Edmund, without making any of it about herself. "Then we have evidence of a coordinated legal scheme conducted across state lines. That's federal jurisdiction." Bill Aldrich sat back in his chair and looked at this woman who'd arrived in his kitchen out of the snow with a notebook and compass readings and the quiet authority of someone who'd been fighting this particular kind of war since before it showed up in Colorado. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. "Kansas City most recently," Nora said. "Before that, everywhere." They left the Aldrich place with a purchase letter. 2 other documents Bill found in a box under his bed, and a handshake agreement that he'd ride to the Beaumont and Garrett ranches that week and ask the same quiet questions Nora had asked him. On the ride home, the snow had softened into something almost gentle, and the trail opened enough that they could ride side by side. "You didn't tell him about Edmund," Caleb said. "It wasn't relevant to him. It was relevant to where your knowledge comes from." "My knowledge comes from 10 years of watching and learning." She kept her eyes on the trail. "Edmund didn't give me that. He just gave me a specific example that confirmed what I already understood." A pause. "I don't define myself by what happened in St. Louis. I define myself by what I did about it." Caleb rode with that for a moment. "What did you do for yourself?" he said. "After. Not for the families he defrauded. For you." She was quiet long enough that he thought he'd gone too far. "I packed everything I owned into a trunk," she said finally. "Moved out of my aunt's house. Found a room at a boarding house on the south side of the city and spent 3 months reading every land law statute I could find in the county library." Her voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. "And then I answered the agency's notice because I was done with cities and men in suits and rooms where nobody ever said what they actually meant." She glanced at him. "Your letter said plain and practical, no complications. It sounded like someone who meant what he wrote." "I did mean it." "I know." Something almost like a smile moved across her face. "That's why I chose it." They were half a mile from the ranch when Caleb saw the riders. 3 of them stopped on the rise above the north pasture, watching the property from just far enough away to claim they were on the public road. The gray horse in the middle was the same gray horse Nora had described from the northwest boundary the morning before. They weren't hiding. They weren't pretending to be passing through. They were watching, and they wanted to be seen watching. Caleb pulled his horse to a stop. "I see them," Nora said quietly. "The one in the middle worked for Voss. I recognize the horse." "They want you to see them." Her voice had gone to the calm, flat tone he'd learned meant she was thinking fast beneath a very still surface. "This is establishment of presence. It's the step before actual intimidation." She didn't reach for anything, didn't change her posture. "Don't react. Keep riding at the same pace." And if I want to ride up there and ask them their business on my land, then you give Voss's lawyers documentation that you confronted his employees unprovoked." She looked at him with the directness he'd stopped finding startling somewhere around day 2. "I know what it goes against every instinct you have. I know what it feels like to see the problem right in front of you and be told to walk past it." A beat. Walk past it. He rode past it, past. It was one of the harder things he'd done in recent memory, and he'd had a hard year. The riders watched them go without moving, and that stillness was its own kind of statement, and Caleb felt it between his shoulder blades all the way to the barn. That evening, Desmond came back. He sat at the kitchen table with his hat on his knee, and the expression he'd been wearing a lot lately, the one that meant news he didn't want to carry. "Talked to 3 people in town today," Desmond said. "Bill's story is spreading. People are starting to understand what Voss is doing." He turned his hat in his hands. "And Voss knows they're understanding it. His man Jake Pwitt was in the saloon tonight, telling anyone who'd listen that Caleb Hardin's new woman is a con artist from Missouri who talks law she doesn't know and is going to get the whole valley into trouble by provoking a company that could build or destroy half the commerce in this county." The room went quiet. Nora set down her pen. She didn't look up immediately. When she did, her face was composed in a way Caleb recognized now as the thing she did when something had hit a place that was genuinely tender, not the surface, but deeper. "Who was listening?" she asked. "Some, not everybody." Desmond looked at her steadily. "Ruth Calloway told Pwitt to take his opinion somewhere else. That's something." A pause. "The ones who listened, will they talk to their neighbors?" "Probably." "Then by tomorrow half the valley will have heard I'm a fraud before they've heard anything else." She said it without self-pity. Pure calculation. Voss is smart. He's not going after the land argument first. He's going after the person making the argument. "That's my read too," Desmond said. Caleb looked at her. She had her hands flat on the table in front of her, and he could see the small tension in them, controlled and contained, but present. "Nora." She looked up. "Is there anything in your history in St. Louis that he could use? I'm not asking to judge it. I'm asking so we're not surprised." She held his gaze for a long moment. "Edmund's family filed a defamation complaint against me when I went to his competitors. It was dismissed inside of 2 weeks because I had documentation. But the filing exists. It's public record." She paused. "A man like Voss with the right connections could find it and make it look like something it isn't." "Could he make it stick to a judge?" "No." Her jaw tightened. "To the people of Redstone Creek who don't know me yet." A beat. "Possibly." Desmond stood and put his hat back on. "I'll ride out to the Beaumont place first thing. Get their story documented before Pwitt's version has time to settle." He looked at Caleb. "You trust her?" It wasn't quite a question. "Yes," Caleb said. He said it before he'd finished deciding to which was he was learning how he said the things he actually meant. Desmond nodded once. "Then that's enough for me." He moved toward the door. "Watch your north line tonight. Those riders don't come out in snow for sightseeing." After Desmond left, neither of them spoke for a moment. The fire moved in the stove. Outside, the snow was starting again, softer this time. "You didn't have to say that," Nora said. "I know. You barely know me, barely know. I know what I've watched you do in 4 days." He turned from the window. "I know that you found a survey trespasser before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. I know you walked into Loomis's office and made him open a ledger he'd been keeping closed for 6 months. I know you sat in Bill Aldrich's kitchen and listened to him for an hour, without once making him feel stupid for being afraid." He held her gaze. "That's enough to know." Nora looked at him with those dark eyes that took inventory of everything. For the first time since he'd met her, she didn't seem to know immediately what to say. Then something shifted in her face, not a collapse, not a performance. Something genuine and private moving under the surface. "Caleb." Her voice was different. Not the practical voice, not the legal voice. Something underneath all of those. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it the way I mean it, not the way it might sound. Tell me. I've been in situations where I trusted the wrong person, where I believed what someone showed me instead of what they were. She looked at her hands. I'm very careful now about what I let myself believe, not because I'm afraid of being wrong, but because I know what it costs. She looked up. I'm not going to pretend I don't know that something is happening between us. I'm not built for pretending. But I need to know that you see me not the solution to your land problem. Not someone to run your books, me. The fire crackled. The snow came down outside. I see you, Caleb said, and then, because he was a man who'd spent 7 years being careful and was beginning to understand what that caution had cost him, he said the rest. I see someone who came to a strange territory to help a stranger and found a fight she didn't sign up for and didn't leave. I see someone who makes me feel... He stopped, started again. I haven't felt like my own best judgment in 7 years. Since Margaret. Since Daniel. His son's name, which he hadn't said aloud to anyone in 2 years, came out quiet and rough, like a word in a language he'd almost forgotten. I wake up thinking like myself again, and I don't know how to account for that, except you. Nora didn't move for a long moment. Then she crossed the kitchen and stood in front of him, and put her hand flat on his chest, right over the place where that cold thing had been living for 7 years, and looked up at him with those steady dark eyes. I'm not leaving, she said. Not because of Voss. Not because of whatever Puit is saying in town. Not because this is hard. A breath. But I need you to trust me the way I'm trusting you. All the way. Not halfway, not provisionally. I know, he said. Do you... He put his hand over hers. I'm learning. She held his gaze for one more searching second. Then she stepped back, practical again, present again, but different in a way that was now between them and couldn't be taken back. Get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow is going to be complicated. He almost asked how she knew. Then he remembered she'd said that every night and been right every morning. He went to bed without asking. At 2 a.m, the north fence went down. He heard the cattle before he heard anything else, that particular sound of a herd in confused motion, not panicked, but displaced, moving wrong in the dark. He was dressed and out the door in under a minute. Nora was right behind him. They rode the north line in the dark with lanterns following the sound, and found the break a quarter mile up. Wire cut clean. 6 posts pulled loose. A gap wide enough to drive a wagon through. The tracks in the snow led north, at least 4 horses moving fast and not bothering to hide the direction. 30 head gone. Caleb stood at the break with his lantern and his fists, and the particular quality of rage that comes from watching something you've built being taken apart piece by someone who knows you can't afford to replace it. Don't, Nora said behind him. Don't what? Don't ride north. That's exactly what they want. Nora. Caleb. She stepped forward until she was beside him, her lantern throwing both their shadows long across the snow. I know what this feels like. I know the feeling of watching something be taken and knowing exactly who took it and not being able to move directly. Her voice was iron underneath and something else on top, something that understood from the inside out. But if you ride onto Voss's range in the middle of the night, his men put you in the ground and claim defense. Everything we've built in 4 days dies with you. He stood in the snow with the cold and the rage and 30 missing cattle and the broken fence, and he listened to the woman beside him breathe. Then what do we do? He said. First light, we go to Loomis with the tracks and the compass readings and the timeline. We add it to the record. She turned to face him fully. And then we go get your cattle back the way that actually makes Voss pay for them in court in front of a judge and a record that follows him for the rest of his life. That takes time. Yes. I don't have time. I don't have the cattle. I don't have the money to... I know. She put her hand on his arm, firm and grounding. I know what you have and what you don't. I've been running the numbers since day 1. She held his gaze in the dark. Trust me. He looked at her. This woman who'd been here 4 days and was standing in his snow in the middle of the night, like she'd been standing in it her whole life. All right, he said. They rode back to the house in the dark, with the missing cattle behind them, and the long, complicated, dangerous work of what came next stretched out ahead. And Caleb Hardin, who'd spent 7 years building walls against exactly this kind of dependence, felt the last of the first wall come down in the cold Colorado night, and didn't reach to hold it up. They were at Loomis's office before the sheriff had finished his first cup of coffee. Nora laid the compass readings on his desk, alongside the timeline she'd built overnight, 4 hours of work by lamplight, while Caleb repaired what he could of the north fence in the dark. The timeline showed every incident in chronological order across 5 ranches, with dates, descriptions, and the pattern that connected them. She'd written it in the clear, precise hand of someone who understood that a document is only useful if the person reading it cannot misunderstand it. Loomis read it without speaking. He read it twice. Then he sat back and looked at the ceiling like a man having a private argument with himself and losing. "Wade," Caleb said. "I've got 30 head gone and tracks that lead straight north. I've got a broken fence line that matches the 2 previous breaks on my property. I've got Nora's compass documentation putting Voss's surveyor inside my boundary line 2 days ago." He leaned forward. "I need you to do your job. Today. Not when it's convenient. Not when Voss's lawyers have had time to build a counter-narrative. Today." Loomis looked at Nora. "You're sure about the tracks? I documented them at 2:15 this morning with a lantern and a compass and measurements against a fixed fence post," she said. "I'm sure." Another long silence. The kind that meant a man was running out of reasons to say no and knew it. "If I ride out to Voss's range looking for those cattle," Loomis said slowly, "and they're there, I'm starting something I can't stop." "They already started it," Nora said. "Voss started it 18 months ago. You're not starting anything. You're responding to it." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but no less firm. "Sheriff Loomis, I know you're tired. I know you've been watching this valley change and feeling like you can't hold it together. I know Voss represents money and development and things that look like progress from a certain angle." She leaned forward. "But there is no version of this that ends well for Redstone Creek if you don't act now. The ranchers in this valley are the backbone of this community. When Voss controls the water access, he controls every one of them. And men who control water in this territory don't stop there." Loomis stared at his desk. A long moment passed. "My deputy's out sick," he said finally. "Desmond Pike will ride with you," Caleb said. "Bill Aldrich and me." "And me," Nora said. Both men looked at her. "I have documented evidence of the track pattern, the compass readings, and the timeline that ties this incident to the larger scheme. If you find those cattle, and this goes to a judge, you want the person who built that case present and available to testify." She looked at Loomis with complete steadiness. "Unless you'd rather explain to the territorial court why you left your primary witness at home." Loomis picked up his hat. They rode out 4 strong Caleb, Nora, Loomis, and Desmond, who'd appeared at the ranch at dawn with his rifle across his saddle and the look of a man who'd made a decision in the night and was done revisiting it. Bill Aldrich met them at the north fence line with 2 of his ranch hands, and the expression on his face when he saw the clean-cut wire and pulled posts was the expression of a man recognizing something he'd been trying to convince himself wasn't real. "Same tool marks," Nora said, crouching at the cut wire. "Same compression pattern at the break point consistent with the tool used at the 2 previous fence cuts on this property and the 3 documented cuts at the Aldrich Ranch." She looked up at Loomis. "I want that noted." "Noted," Loomis said, and he was writing in his own ledger now, which meant something it hadn't meant yesterday. They followed the tracks north for 2 hours past the boundary of Caleb's land and into the open range that bordered Voss's northern holdings. The trail was clear in the snow. 30 head driven fast, the prints of 4 horses pressing them along. Whoever had done this hadn't worried about being followed. That was the first thing that bothered Caleb. The second was the silence when they crested the ridge above Voss's northern pasture and looked down. The cattle were there. All 30 head penned in a makeshift enclosure near a line shack that was too new and too well built to be accidental. 2 men stood guard, and 50 yards back at the entrance to a narrow canyon, 3 more men sat on horses watching the ridge with the patient stillness of people who had been expecting company. "It's a trap," Caleb said. "Yes," Nora said. She said it without surprise, without panic, with the tone of someone who'd already run this calculation and was 2 steps past it. "But it's also an opportunity." Loomis looked at her. "How in the hell is this an opportunity?" "Because those cattle are on Voss's land in plain sight of a sheriff and 3 witnesses. They haven't been rebranded. We're less than 12 hours out there wasn't time." She scanned the layout below without turning her head. "And because the men waiting for us to charge down that hill are planning to claim that Caleb drove his own cattle onto Voss's land looking for a confrontation. That's the narrative Voss's lawyers will use." She paused. "Which means we don't go down that hill. Not the way they expect." "Then how?" Desmond said. "Sheriff Loomis goes down alone, badge visible, no weapons raised. He identifies himself, states he's investigating a theft report, documents the brand's demands the men stand aside. Every step witnessed by the 4 of us up here." She looked at Loomis directly. "If they let you through, you document everything. If they refuse to let law enforcement access to a theft investigation, that refusal is itself a crime. Either way, you walk out with what we need. And if they shoot at me," Loomis said flatly, "then they've committed attempted murder of a law officer in front of witnesses, and this goes federal this afternoon instead of next month." She held his gaze. "They won't shoot you. Voss is meticulous. He doesn't do anything that can't be explained away. Shooting a sheriff cannot be explained away." Caleb watched Loomis work through it. Watched the man's face move from resistance through reluctant logic to the heavy settling acceptance of someone who'd run out of reasons to say no. "If this goes wrong," Loomis started. "It won't," Nora said. "You sound very sure of that for someone who's been in this valley 5 days. I've been watching men like Voss operate for 3 years. Her voice didn't waver. "I know how they think. I know where they stop." A pause. "He doesn't think you'll do this. He thinks you're as intimidated as you've been for the last 18 months. She held his gaze. "Prove him wrong." Wade Loomis looked at Caleb one more time. Caleb gave him a single nod. The sheriff rode down the hill alone, badge catching the cold morning light, and the 4 of them on the ridge watched without moving or speaking, while below the confrontation played out in the careful, measured language of a man doing his job properly for the first time in too long. The men at the canyon mouth didn't move. The guards at the enclosure stepped aside after what appeared to be a tense exchange. Loomis dismounted, checked brands, wrote in his ledger. He did it slowly. He did it completely. When he rode back up the hill, his face was different than when he'd gone down. "All 30, he said. "Brands unaltered, consistent with Hardin's registry." He looked at Caleb. "I've documented it." "Can you compel their return?" Nora asked. "On a documented theft with verified brands and a witness trail." Loomis almost smiled. "Yeah, I can do that." "Then do it today," she said, "before Voss's lawyers file anything this afternoon." Gerald Voss appeared in Redstone Creek 2 hours later. Caleb was outside the sheriff's office when the carriage arrived, a Denver-built coach that was too expensive for the road. It was traveling, which was exactly the kind of statement it was designed to make. Voss stepped out with the unhurried confidence of a man who owned most of the chairs he was ever asked to sit in, dressed in a coat that cost more than Caleb's monthly feed bill, and surveyed the street with the patient, slightly amused expression of someone watching a chessboard from a position of overwhelming advantage. He was shorter than Caleb expected. He didn't know why that surprised him. Voss saw Caleb immediately and walked toward him, with his hand extended like they were old acquaintances at a county fair. "Mr. Hardin." His voice was warm. That was the first thing that made Caleb's stomach tighten, the absolute practiced ease of that warmth. "I've been hoping we'd have the chance to speak directly." Caleb didn't take the hand. "Mr. Voss." Voss let the hand drop without visible reaction. "I understand there's been some confusion about livestock this morning. I want you to know that whatever happened, it was without my knowledge or authorization. I've already spoken to the men responsible. It won't happen again." The men responsible, Caleb said. Who were they? Contracted laborers, not employees of the company. Their behavior was unacceptable, and they've been released. Convenient. Voss smiled. Mr. Hardin, I've been trying to establish a productive relationship with the ranchers in this valley for over a year. I've been met with suspicion and resistance at every turn. I understand the concern about outside development, which is why I'd very much like to sit down with you and discuss what a partnership arrangement might look like, one that protects your land rights, while allowing development that could bring real economic benefit to this community. Mr. Voss, it was Nora's voice from behind Caleb's right shoulder, carrying that particular quality it developed when she'd heard enough. Voss looked at her. Something moved through his expression, not quite surprise, more like recalibration. The reassessment of a man who'd received intelligence about a person and is now comparing it to the actual person standing in front of him. You must be Miss Shaw, he said. Mrs. Hardin, she said, or close enough that the distinction doesn't matter for this conversation. She stepped forward so she was standing beside Caleb, rather than behind him. I've read your filings, Mr. Voss. Both of them. I've read the surveyor's report you filed 3 days ago. I've read the 2 preliminary inquiries that preceded it. She held his gaze with complete steadiness. And I've read 6 filings from Jefferson County, Missouri, where the identical legal template was used in 1874 and 1875 against 4 farming families, 3 of whom sold under duress, 1 of whom fought it, and 1 when a federal circuit court ruled the boundary survey methodology fraudulent. Something shifted in Voss's expression, barely, but Caleb saw it. And he thought Nora saw it too because her next words came harder. I know which case established that precedent, she said. I know which judge wrote the ruling. I know which attorney argued the winning side. And I know that he is currently practicing in Colorado Springs. She paused. Which is where I sent a wire this morning. The street went very quiet. You're a resourceful woman, Voss said. The warmth was still present, but it had developed something sharp underneath it. I'm a woman who knows what you're doing and how to stop it. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Your surveyor's report will be challenged on methodology by an attorney who has successfully argued this exact issue before a federal circuit. Your boundary claim will be compared against the Jefferson County precedent. Your history of filing identical documents across multiple jurisdictions will be entered into the territorial record. She let that settle. You can still walk away from this, Mr. Voss. Take your survey and your operation and find water access somewhere that doesn't require destroying 5 families who built this valley with their own hands. You'll save your company considerable legal expense and a significant amount of unwanted federal attention. Voss looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. You're letting a woman you've known for less than a week dictate your legal strategy. I'm listening to someone who's right, Caleb said. That's a very romantic position. The warmth had gone entirely now. What was underneath it was not rage. Men like Voss didn't do rage. Caleb was learning, but a cold, patient certainty. It's also a very expensive one. I've been in this territory for 2 years, Mr. Hardin. I have relationships with territorial judges, county surveyors, and commercial interests in every town between here and Denver. Whatever your... He glanced at Nora. Associate wire to Colorado Springs this morning will not arrive before my attorneys file their response to the sheriff's interference today. And once that process is moving, it has a momentum that one rural rancher and one clever woman are not going to stop. He said it without heat. That was what made it land. He got back in his carriage. Caleb stood in the street and watched it roll away and felt the cold thing come back into his chest wider than before. He's right, he said. His voice came out flat. About the momentum, about the connections. We bought time this morning, Nora, but... Caleb. She turned to face him. Look at me. He looked at her. Do you remember what I told you about the family in Jefferson County? The one that fought the survey claim and won? She held his gaze. They didn't win because they had more money or more connections. They won because they got to the federal circuit before the company had time to bury the case in territorial procedures. They moved fast, and they moved with documentation that couldn't be reinterpreted. She put her hand on his arm. We have that documentation. We have Loomis's record from this morning. We have the survey trespass I documented 3 days ago. We have the timeline covering 5 ranches over 6 months. She paused. What we need is one more thing. What? We need someone on Voss's payroll who's scared enough to talk. Desmond spoke from behind them, quiet and certain. The 2 men he threw under the carriage this morning, the ones Voss just called contracted laborers and released. He let that sit for a moment. Men like that who've just been cut loose by a rich man who told the world their behavior was unacceptable are sitting somewhere right now realizing they've been made into evidence that disappears when it's convenient. He looked at Nora. That's a man with something to say. Do you know who they are? She asked. I know one of them, Tommy Reeves. Grew up in this valley. His mother still lives here. A pause. He's not a bad man. Got himself mixed up in Voss's operation because the money was good and he didn't ask enough questions. Where would he go? Nora said. Not a question. A direction. His mother's place, 3 miles east. Nora looked at Caleb. He nodded once. Go, he said. She and Desmond rode for Tommy Reeves's mother's place, and Caleb went inside and sat down at the rough kitchen table and put his head in his hands for just a moment, not in defeat, but in the private exhaustion of a man who has been holding a great weight for a very long time and has finally found someone willing to hold it with him. That thought was what surprised him most. Not the fear, not the anger, the relief. He'd been alone in this for so long that the simple fact of having someone who understood the terrain, who moved through difficulty without flinching, who looked at Gerald Voss in a public street and told him exactly what she knew and exactly what she planned to do about it, that simple fact was almost more than he could absorb. He thought about Margaret, about standing in this same kitchen 7 years ago, watching her face close down like a window being shuttered about the specific way she'd said, I can't live like this. Not as accusation, just fact. She hadn't been wrong about herself. She'd been wrong to come in the first place, and he'd been wrong to think that want was the same thing as suited for. He didn't think Nora Shaw was wrong to be here. He thought she might be the only person who had ever been exactly right to be here. And he didn't know what to do with that yet, except to not waste it. They came back 2 hours later with Tommy Reeves sitting between them on a borrowed horse, pale and thin-faced, carrying the look of a young man who'd made a series of decisions that all seemed reasonable at the time, and had arrived somewhere he didn't recognize. He'll testify, Nora said, dismounting in the yard. He can put Voss's foreman at the fence line the night of the first cut 8 months ago. He can put 3 of Voss's named employees at the Beaumont incident, and he can testify that Voss himself gave the order for the cattle theft 2 nights ago in a direct conversation Tommy was present for. Her voice was controlled, but something beneath it was alive and certain. He heard it. He can repeat it word for word. Caleb looked at Tommy Reeves. The young man met his eyes with the particular expression of someone stepping off a ledge and not knowing yet if the ground is close or far. Mr. Hardin, Tommy said. I'm sorry for what we did to your place. I know, Caleb said. And then because it was true. Thank you. Tommy nodded. His jaw worked. Mr. Voss said we were just moving cattle. Said it was a negotiating tactic. Said nobody would get hurt. He looked at his hands. He's been saying that for 8 months and people keep getting hurt. Will you say all of that to a federal judge? Nora asked. Yes, ma'am. She looked at Caleb. Then we wire Colorado Springs tonight. The attorney I contacted this morning will want to know we have a direct witness to Voss's orders. That changes the filing from a land dispute to criminal conspiracy. She held his gaze with the steady, certain look he'd come to understand, meant she'd thought it through completely and was sure. It's over, Caleb. Not today and not without more fight. But the outcome is decided. Caleb Hardin looked at this woman in his yard. This woman who'd arrived 5 days ago on a stagecoach with a trunk and a medical bag and a notebook and a compass, and the kind of fierce, relentless, practical conviction that he hadn't known existed outside of stories, and felt the last remnant of the cold thing in his chest dissolve like snow in warm water. "Nora," he said. "Yes, when this is over." He stopped. Started again because he was done doing things halfway. "I want you to stay, not because you're useful, not because the ranch needs 2 people, because I can't imagine waking up to this place without you in it. It's only been 5 days. I know that, but I'm done waiting for things to make sense before I say them." She was very still. "I'm not finished being scared," he said. "I'm not saying I've got it figured out. I'm saying I want to figure it out with you, and I'm asking you to let me." Nora Shaw stood in the yard of the ranch she'd ridden onto 5 days ago, as a stranger, and looked at this man scarred and stubborn and honest, in the way that only people who've been broken and rebuilt are honest, and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was still held tight. "I already told you I'm not leaving," she said. "I know. I'm asking for more than that." A long moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved. "Ask properly, then." He almost smiled. It was the most he'd smiled in years. "Nora Shaw," he said. "Stay." "Yes," she said. And it was the most uncomplicated word either of them had said in 5 days, and it landed between them like something settled and solid and permanent. Tommy Reeves looked at his boots. Desmond studied the mountains with great interest. The wire to Colorado Springs went out that evening. The answer came back before midnight. The attorney's name was Harlan Cole. He was taking the first morning stage. Harlan Cole stepped off the morning stage looking like a man who'd slept in his coat and didn't care, which immediately made Caleb trust him more than any attorney he'd ever met. He was 60, maybe 65, with a face that had been weathered by 30 years of territorial courtrooms and didn't apologize for it. He carried 1 bag and a leather case so worn at the corners it had probably seen 3 territories and 2 wars. He shook Caleb's hand with the grip of someone who'd learned that a handshake told you most of what you needed to know about a person. Then he turned to Nora and looked at her the way a man looks at a card hand he hadn't expected. "You're the one who wired me." "I am." "You cited the Whitmore ruling in your telegram. It was directly applicable." He studied her for a moment. "How do you know the Whitmore ruling?" "I read the transcript twice." She handed him the folder she'd been carrying since before dawn, the full timeline, the compass documentation, Loomis's filed report, Tommy Reeves's written statement, and the copies of Voss's filings with the identical template language, marked and annotated in her precise hand. "I've also cross-referenced Voss's survey methodology against the methodology the circuit court ruled fraudulent in Whitmore. The variance calculation is identical to within a margin of 2%. Cole opened the folder and read it standing in the street outside the stage depot. Nobody said anything while he did it. Ruth Calloway had come out of her store to watch and was pretending she hadn't. Desmond stood with his arms crossed and the expression of a man watching something historic that he wasn't entirely sure how to categorize. Cole closed the folder. "Who taught you property law?" "No one," Nora said. "I taught myself." "Why?" "Because someone had to." She held his gaze. "Will you take the case?" "I took it when you cited Whitmore in a telegram from a cattle town." He tucked the folder under his arm. "Now take me somewhere with coffee and tell me about this Tommy Reeves." Ruth Calloway, who had been pretending not to listen from 6 feet away, turned back to her store without a word. But not before Caleb caught the expression on her face, the particular look of a woman who has just seen something she intends to talk about for the next 20 years. Cole worked from Ruth's back room, which Ruth offered without being asked, and refused to be thanked for. He sat up at the table with Nora's documents spread before him, and within the first hour, Caleb understood something he hadn't fully understood. Before watching Nora work alongside this man was like watching 2 people who spoke the same rare language discover each other in a room full of people who didn't. Cole would tap a line in the filing, and Nora would already be turning to the corresponding page in her notes. She'd identify a gap in the documentation, and he'd already be writing the question that would fill it. They moved through the case with the focused efficiency of people who understood that every wasted hour was an hour Voss's attorneys were spending on the other side of the argument. Caleb brought them coffee, stayed out of the way, and tried not to think about what it would mean if this didn't work. Tommy Reeves gave his formal statement on the second day. He sat across from Cole at Ruth's back table with his hat in his hands, and the look of a young man who had spent the night deciding something and was now committed to it regardless of the cost. Nora sat to the side with her notebook. Caleb stood near the door. Cole didn't rush him. He asked one question and waited, and Tommy talked. The voice shook in the first 10 minutes and then steadied the way a man's voice does when he stops performing courage and starts actually having it. By the end of it, Tommy had placed Gerald Voss in direct command of every major incident over 8 months, named 4 employees by name, and described a conversation in Voss's private office in which the water access strategy had been laid out with the kind of clarity that only happens when a man is so certain of his own power that he stops being careful. He said the ranchers would fold, Tommy told Cole quietly. Said they always did. Said the ones who didn't fold eventually ran out of money, and it amounted to the same thing. He looked at his hands. He said it like he was talking about weather, like they weren't even people he was discussing. Cole wrote it all down. Nora wrote it all down. They compared versions and reconciled every discrepancy until the statement was airtight and signed and notarized by the county clerk, who had the look of a man who'd spent years being last to know things and was processing the experience of being first. That evening, Caleb sat on the front step of his ranch house with a cup of coffee gone cold and the specific exhaustion of a man who hasn't slept properly in a week and can't afford to stop yet. The mountains were going dark against a pale sky. Somewhere out there, Gerald Voss was in a comfortable room with his attorneys building a counter-argument, and the distance between what they had and what they needed felt both smaller and larger than it had a week ago. The door opened behind him. Nora sat down on the step beside him without asking, which she never did anymore. She'd stopped asking permission for things that were already hers. "Cole thinks we're ready," she said. "I know what Cole thinks. I want to know what you think." She was quiet for a moment. Not the calculating quiet, the honest kind. "I think we have everything we need to win this. I also think Voss has one more move we haven't seen yet." She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "Men like him don't accept defeat the way it's handed to them. They find the angle you didn't account for." "What angle?" "I don't know yet. That's what worries me." Caleb looked at her profile in the last of the light. "You've been running on 4 hours of sleep for 3 days. So have you." "I'm used to it." "So am I." She glanced at him. "I'm not fragile, Caleb." "I know that." He said it quietly. "I also know that someone can know how to carry a heavy thing and still be tired from carrying it. Those aren't contradictions." She looked at him for a moment, with an expression he'd seen only a few times. The one that appeared when something he said landed somewhere she hadn't expected it to reach. "Go to sleep," she said finally. "You first." She almost smiled. "That's not how it works. Tonight it is." He stood, took her coffee cup, and held out his hand. She looked at it for a half second. That private calculation she made before accepting help, the one he'd learned not to rush, and then she took it and stood. They went inside, and for the first time in the week since she'd arrived, the house felt like the right size. The third day brought Voss's countermove, and it came from a direction none of them had anticipated. Cole was midway through drafting the formal response to the injunction when the county clerk arrived at Ruth's back room with a document that had just been filed not from Voss's Denver attorneys, but from a law firm in Kansas City that nobody in Redstone Creek had ever heard of. Cole read it standing up. His expression didn't change, but the quality of his stillness did the stillness of a man absorbing something that requires a moment to fully process. "What is it?" Nora asked. Cole set the document on the table and turned it to face her. She read it. Caleb watched her face. He'd gotten good at reading what was happening beneath her surface, the small signals that broke through the composure when something genuinely landed. He saw it happen now. A tightening around her eyes. a breath drawn in just slightly too carefully. "Edmund," she said. The word came out flat and precise as a blade. "What?" Caleb said. "Edmund Cross." She looked up at Cole. "He filed an affidavit in support of Voss's position, attesting to my character. Or rather," her voice stayed even, but something inside it did not attesting to his version of my character. Caleb took the document. The affidavit described Nora Shaw as a woman of questionable reliability who had made false allegations against a respected attorney in St. Louis who had been the subject of a defamation filing, and whose interpretation of legal documents had previously been demonstrated to be both inaccurate and motivated by personal grievance. Every word of it was technically true. Every word of it was designed to mean something it didn't. "He found her," Caleb said. The cold thing was back, but it was different now. Not fear, not exactly. Something older and harder than fear. "He was always findable," Nora said. "I knew this was possible. I just didn't know Voss had already made contact with him." She looked at Cole. "How much damage does this do?" Cole sat down. "To a judge who knows property law and has read your documentation, almost none. The affidavit is character testimony, not evidence. It can't override your compass readings or the Whitmore precedent." He paused. "To the people of Redstone Creek who will hear about this before the hearing, that's a different question. Voss doesn't need to win in court," Nora said, and Caleb could hear in her voice that she'd understood this before Cole finished the sentence. "He needs enough people in this valley to doubt me long enough to make the ranchers who were starting to organize lose their nerve." "That's my read," Cole said. "Then we move the hearing date," Nora said. "Can you file for an expedited schedule?" Cole looked at her. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that the opposing party is actively conducting a campaign to intimidate and discredit witnesses. We document the affidavit, we document Jake Pruitt's saloon campaign. We document the riders on Caleb's fence line, and we argue that the integrity of the case requires a faster timeline." She looked at Caleb. "The longer this drags out, the more time Voss has to work on the people we need." "It's aggressive," Cole said. "Yes." She met his eyes. "Do you think it works?" A pause. "I think it's the kind of argument that either works completely or blows up in your face. Then we make sure we don't blow it." She turned to Caleb. "What do you think?" The question landed differently than he expected it to. Not because she was asking his permission, she never did that, and he'd stopped expecting it after the first day, but because she was genuinely asking, including him in it, making it a decision they made together rather than one she made and he ratified. "I think," Caleb said, "that we've been playing defense since the first day. I think Voss expects us to keep playing defense, and I think you just described the one thing he's not ready for." Nora looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Cole. "File it." Cole filed the motion for expedited hearing that afternoon. By evening, the news of Edmund Cross's affidavit had spread through Redstone Creek, the way news always spread in small towns, fast, incomplete, and shaped by whoever told it first. Desmond arrived at the ranch just before dark, with the particular expression that meant he'd been listening to people say things that required a response. "People are talking," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table without being invited, which was Desmond's way of signaling that something was serious. "Edmund Cross's name is spreading. Pruitt's making sure of it. The story he's telling is that Nora came out here to run a scheme that she falsely accused a lawyer in St. Louis, and that Caleb's been taken in by a woman who knows how to make herself sound credible." Nora was at the table with her notebook and didn't look up. "Who's listening to him?" "Some. Not the ranchers who know what Voss did to them. But the people in the middle, the ones who haven't decided yet, some of them are listening." Desmond looked at Caleb. "Bill Aldrich sent word. He's solid. So are the Beaumont brothers. But old man Garrett is wavering." "Garrett's testimony isn't essential," Nora said, still writing. "His presence at the hearing is," Desmond said. "If he doesn't show, it looks like the coalition is fracturing. Voss's lawyers will use that." "Then we go see Garrett." "He's not a man who responds well to pressure." "I know." She set down her pen. Which is why we don't pressure him. We go and we listen. She looked at Caleb. Same as Bill Aldrich. We let him talk, and we don't tell him what to think. Caleb looked at her. Tonight. Tomorrow morning, first light. She picked up her pen again. Tonight I need to finish something. After Desmond left, Caleb stood in the doorway of the kitchen and watched her work. The lamp threw a circle of light around the table. Her pen moved across the page steadily without hesitation, the scratch of it the only sound in the house. "What are you writing?" he asked. She looked up. "A letter to Edmund Cross." The room went very still. "Nora, not what you're thinking." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking him to retract it. I'm not threatening him. I'm informing him that his affidavit has been received, that I have retained Harlan Cole of Colorado Springs, that Cole is the attorney who argued the Whitmore case and is preparing to cite it in federal circuit, and that I will be entering into the permanent territorial record a full account of Edmund's activities in Jefferson County, Missouri, documented, sourced, and submitted as context for understanding why a man with his history might choose to provide character testimony against me in a case involving the same legal methodology he used himself." She said all of it in the level, precise voice she used for everything that mattered. "You're telling him what's coming," Caleb said. "I'm giving him the choice to step back from it while he still can." A pause. "He won't. Edmund doesn't step back from things. But when the federal record is assembled, it will show that he was informed and proceeded anyway. That's not nothing." Caleb came into the kitchen and sat down across from her. "You've thought about him a lot. Since you've been here, I've thought about what he represents. That's different from thinking about him." She set down her pen and looked at Caleb directly. "Edmund wasn't the first man who underestimated what I was capable of. He was just the one who organized it into a legal strategy. When I stopped being angry at him specifically and started understanding the pattern." She paused. "That's when I got useful." "You got useful a long time ago. I got effective. There's a difference. Useful implies being in service of someone else's purpose." She held his gaze. "I'm not in service of anyone's purpose but my own. What I choose to do with that is just how it looks from the outside." Caleb looked at this woman across his rough kitchen table, in the lamplight on a cold October night in Colorado, and felt something in him settle in a way it hadn't settled since before the worst things had happened. Not a feeling exactly. Something underneath feeling. The specific quality of certainty that comes when you've been doubting something for a long time and suddenly stop. "I told Desmond I trusted you," he said. "I know. I want you to know why." He said it quietly, looking at the table, then looking at her. "Not because of what you did for the ranch or what you know about Voss or what happened today with Cole. Those things are true, and they matter. But the reason I trust you is because you're the same person at 2 in the morning at a broken fence line that you are at 2 in the afternoon in a sheriff's office. You don't adjust yourself depending on who's watching. That's not common. I don't know if I told you that's what I was seeing, but that's what I was seeing." Nora was very still. "Caleb, you don't have to say anything. I want to." She folded her hands on the table. "The reason I came here, not to this valley, not to this ranch specifically, but the reason I left is that I spent 8 months in St. Louis watching a man I thought I knew perform a version of himself for every room he walked into. A different Edmund for his family, for his clients, for the judges he needed for me." Her voice stayed steady, but something moved underneath it. "I stopped trusting my own judgment after that. I thought if I'd been wrong about him, I could be wrong about anything." She looked at Caleb. "I haven't been wrong about you. You've known me 8 days. I know." Her chin lifted slightly. 8 days is long enough to know whether someone is performing or whether they're just themselves. You're just yourself. You're the same man, whether you're angry at a broken fence or scared about losing this place or—" She paused, saying something you didn't plan to say. He almost smiled. "That obvious? To me, yes." She picked up her pen again. "Let me finish this letter." He let her finish the letter. Old Man Garrett was a harder conversation than Bill Aldrich had been. He lived alone at the eastern edge of the valley in a house that had started falling apart 3 years ago and had been making steady progress since. He was in his 70s, lean and weathered and suspicious in the particular way of men who'd been disappointed enough times to stop expecting otherwise. He let them in without warmth and sat across from them at his table with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who'd already decided something and was waiting to see if they could change it. "Heard about the affidavit," he said, looking at Nora. "The lawyer from St. Louis." "Yes," she said. "Heard you had history with him." "I did." "What kind of history?" Caleb started to speak. Nora put her hand briefly on his arm, just a touch, just enough, and he stopped. "The kind where I discovered he was defrauding families using a legal template," she said. "And I tried to stop him, and it cost me my engagement and most of my social standing in St. Louis." She met Garrett's eyes directly. "The kind where he filed a defamation complaint against me that was dismissed in 2 weeks because I had documentation. The kind where he's now providing testimony against me in a case that uses the identical methods he used in Missouri." She paused. "If you want to make that mean something, it doesn't that I'm unreliable or dishonest or running some kind of scheme. I can't stop you from doing that. What I can tell you is that Cole has reviewed everything, and the case stands on its documentation, not on me personally. My credibility is separate from the evidence." Garrett stared at her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Nobody ever is," Nora said. "Mr. Garrett, you lost 20 head last fall in circumstances that didn't add up. I'd like to hear about it if you're willing to tell me." He told her. He was slower than Bill Aldrich, more cautious about each word stopping and restarting the way a man does when he's been holding something long enough that taking it out feels dangerous. Nora listened without interrupting, without writing, which Caleb noticed. She usually wrote everything. This time she just listened, and he understood why Garrett needed to feel heard before he could feel helped, and a notebook would have made it feel like evidence rather than conversation. By the end of it, Garrett's arms had uncrossed. By the end of it, he was looking at the table with the careful expression of a man re-examining something he thought he understood. "They made me feel stupid," he said finally, "for not seeing it sooner, for losing those cattle and not being able to prove how. They designed it that way," Nora said. "The rotation pattern, the timing, it was built specifically to make each of you feel like the problem was yours alone. Like you were the one who wasn't managing well enough." She leaned forward slightly. "You weren't stupid. You were targeted." Garrett looked at her. Something in his face shifted, not dramatically, not with any kind of performance. Just the small, quiet shift of a man setting something down he'd been carrying wrong. "I'll be at the hearing," he said. "Thank you," Nora said, and left it there without building on it, without extracting more, which Caleb had noticed was something she did with a precision that looked like instinct but was almost certainly learned. On the ride back, Caleb was quiet for a long time. "You didn't take notes," he said. "No." "Why?" "Because he needed it to be a conversation, not a deposition." She kept her eyes on the trail. "Cole will take his formal statement later. What mattered today was that he feels like a person who made a decision, not a witness who was managed into one." Caleb rode with that. "You know people," he said. "I've had to. Not with bitterness. Just fact. When you spend most of your adult life in rooms where people don't take you seriously, on first look, you get very good at understanding what they need before you can get to what you need. That's a hard thing to have had to learn." "Yes." She glanced at him. "It's also useful. I don't say that to make it sound fine because it wasn't fine. I say it because it's true." They were back at the ranch before noon, and Cole was waiting on the front step with his leather case on his knee, and an expression that said he'd been sitting there long enough to have used the time for something other than waiting. "The motion for expedited hearing was granted," he said before either of them had dismounted. "Hearing is in 9 days." Nora swung down from the saddle. 9 days. Territorial judge agreed that the circumstances support expedited review. Voss's attorneys filed an objection. Judge denied it. Cole paused. Voss himself is apparently in town. Arrived this morning. Caleb dismounted. Where? Sutton's Hotel. He checked in with 2 attorneys and a man I don't recognize who isn't listed as counsel. Cole looked at Nora. The 3rd man was asking questions in town this morning. About you specifically. Your background, your time in St. Louis, whether anyone here knew you before you arrived. Nora absorbed this without visible reaction. What kind of answers was he getting? Ruth Calloway told him she didn't discuss her customer's personal history with strangers and suggested he try the saloon if he wanted gossip. Cole's mouth moved slightly. Desmond Pike told him he was on private business and to get off his porch. And the others, some talked. Cole met her eyes steadily. This man knew your name before he asked about you. He knew about Edmund Cross. He had details that didn't come from local conversation. A pause. Voss built a file on you before you arrived, possibly before Caleb's letter to the agency was even answered. The air in the yard changed. Caleb looked at Nora. She was standing very still, not with fear, but with the particular quality of stillness that came when she was reorganizing information at speed. He knew who was coming, she said. That's my reading, Cole said, which means he knew what skills the agency was likely to send to a man in a land dispute situation. She turned to Caleb, and he could see it the moment she understood it fully, the way it moved across her face. He wasn't surprised when I confronted him in the street. He'd already accounted for someone like me. The Edmund affidavit was prepared in advance. He had it ready. Then the question, Caleb said slowly, is what else he has ready. Yes? She turned back to Cole. The man asking questions. Can we find out who he is? I can try. He's not local and he's not licensed in Colorado. I'd have found him if he were. Private inquiry agent, Nora said. The words came out with a certainty that wasn't assumption. Voss uses them. Edmund used them. It's how they build files before legal action. They're not lawyers, they don't leave official records, and they're very good at finding information that was meant to stay private. Cole looked at her. Is there information that was meant to stay private? A pause. Not long, but present. Nothing that changes the case, she said. Nothing that's not already in the public record. She met Cole's eyes. But there may be things that are technically true and can be made to look like something they aren't. That's different from false. Tell me, Cole said. All of it. Not what you think matters. Everything, she told him. Caleb stayed because she didn't ask him to leave, and because he'd told Desmond he trusted her, and he intended to mean that completely. She told Cole about the boarding house on the south side of Kansas City, about the 3 months of law reading about a previous position she'd taken as a housekeeper for a family in Jefferson County that had ended abruptly when she'd discovered the husband was running a fraudulent land scheme against his own neighbors, and she'd said so. About the short-lived engagement before Edmund. A decent man, she said with no particular drama, just a man who wanted a wife who would make fewer decisions, and she'd been honest enough with both of them to end it before it became something worse. None of it was scandal. All of it could be made to look like a pattern by someone skilled enough at arrangement. Cole listened without expression until she was done. Then he said, None of this changes the case. I know. But Voss will use whatever he can reach in the room before the judge. I know that too. Then we prepare for it. Cole opened his leather case. Every piece of your history that he might surface, we surface first. We put it into context before he puts it into theirs. A judge who learns something from us reads it one way. A judge who learns something from Voss reads it differently. He looked at her steadily. This is not comfortable work. No, Nora said, but I'm not here for comfortable. Cole almost smiled. No, he said. I can see that. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening. Cole asking Nora, answering Caleb, making coffee, and reading the documents as Cole finished them, and saying nothing except when Cole asked him directly, which was twice, and both times, about facts he could verify from his own memory of events. At one point, Cole set down his pen and looked at Caleb. "You understand that the opposing counsel will try to use your relationship with Miss Shaw against the case. They'll argue she has personal motivation beyond justice." "Let them try," Caleb said. "It's not nothing," Cole said. "In front of a territorial judge who's inclined to see women as—" "I understand what you're saying," Caleb said, "and I'm telling you that the documentation stands without her character, and her character stands without me, and anyone who looks at what she built in 9 days in this valley and calls it motivation rather than competence is arguing against facts they can see." He met Cole's eyes. "Tell me I'm wrong." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You're not wrong," he said. "I just needed to know you understood the risk." "I understand it." Cole picked up his pen. "Good." By 9 that evening, Nora was at the table with her hands flat in front of her, and the notebook closed for the first time in days. The lamplight made her look tired in a way she didn't usually let show. Caleb set a plate of food in front of her, beans and cornbread, the same thing they'd had the first night, which felt like both a long time ago and no time at all. She looked at it, then up at him. "You didn't have to." "You haven't eaten since morning. Neither have you." "I ate at the Garrett Ranch. Mrs. Garrett fed me when you were talking to the old man. You missed it because you were talking." She looked surprised by that, actually surprised in the unguarded way she didn't usually allow. "I didn't notice." "I know." He sat down across from her. "That's how I knew you needed feeding." She picked up a fork. After a moment she said, "Cole is good. The best he tells me." "He's not wrong." A pause. "He's also worried." "About what?" "About the judge. The judge assigned to the hearing. Cole knows his record. He's fair, but he has a history of deference to corporate interest in territory development cases. He's ruled against individual landowners before when the development argument was strong enough." She looked at the table. "Voss will make the development argument. He'll say the water access is essential to economic growth that benefits the whole territory. He'll frame the ranchers as obstacles to progress. And we have to make the judge understand that progress that requires stealing from people isn't progress." She looked up. "That's not a legal argument. That's a moral one. And moral arguments are harder to make than legal ones." Caleb looked at her. "Then make both." She blinked. "Make the legal argument first," he said. "Make it airtight. Cole's got that. And then make the moral one. Tell the judge what it looked like when Voss's men cut my fence line at 2 in the morning. Tell him what Tommy Reeves said about the way Voss talked about the ranchers in this valley, like they weren't people he was discussing. Tell him what old man Garrett looked like when he said they made him feel stupid." He held her gaze. "You're good at making people feel seen. Do it for a judge." Nora was quiet for a long moment. "You've been listening," she said. "You made it hard not to." Something moved across her face, slow and private and more honest than anything she'd let him see yet. She didn't look away. Neither did he. "I love you," she said. She said it the way she said everything, directly, without preamble, without decorating it. "I didn't plan to say that tonight. I don't have a plan for it at all. But I've been carrying it for 3 days, and I'm tired of carrying things by myself when I don't have to." Caleb held her gaze. He felt the words land in his chest and stay there, warm and solid and permanent. Not terrifying the way he'd always expected this moment to be somewhere at the back of his mind. Just true. "I love you too," he said. "I think I have since about the second morning when you showed up in my kitchen with my property map covered in pencil marks before I was fully awake." She laughed. It came out surprised and genuine, and it was the best sound he'd heard in 7 years. "That's an unromantic origin story," she said. "It's an honest one." She turned her hand on the table and held his. "Caleb, whatever happens at the hearing, I need you to know something. You're the first person in my adult life who looked at everything I am and didn't ask me to make any of it smaller. Not quieter, not less certain, not less myself. She held his eyes. That's not something I walk away from. He didn't have words for what that meant to him. He didn't try to find them. He came around the table, and she stood up, and he held her in the kitchen of the small house that had been empty for 7 years, and outside the Colorado wind moved off the mountains, and the stars came out cold and brilliant. And for the first time since the worst day of his life, Caleb Hardin felt completely, solidly at home. Then, from outside in the dark, came the sound of hooves. Not one horse. Several. Moving fast toward the property with the particular urgency that meant this night was not over yet. Caleb released her. He moved to the window. 6 riders. Coming hard from the north, torches lit despite the cold. Nora was already at the door, her coat half on, her voice completely steady. "Get your rifle," she said, "and get Cole." Caleb had his rifle off the wall before Nora finished the sentence. Cole appeared from the back room, with his leather case already under his arm, and the expression of a man who'd been in enough dangerous situations to recognize one without being told. He looked at Caleb, then at Nora, then at the window. "How many?" he said. 6, coming from the north with torches. Caleb checked the rifle. "Desmond's place is 20 minutes out. Don't send for Desmond yet." Nora was at the window watching the riders close the distance. Her voice had that flat, focused quality, thinking fast, showing nothing. "If this is what I think it is, they're not here to hurt anyone. They're here to be seen." 6 men with torches, Caleb said. "That's a threat. That's a performance." She turned from the window. "Voss doesn't do violence that can be traced. He does pressure. He does intimidation. He does things that make you react badly so he can use your reaction." She looked at Caleb directly. "Do not go outside with that rifle unless someone sets fire to something. And if they do set fire to something, then you go outside and I'm right beside you." She held his gaze. "But let them make the first move. Whatever they came here to do, let them do it in front of witnesses." Cole had already moved to the window on the far side of the room. "There's someone behind them," he said quietly. "Hanging back, maybe 100 yards out, no torch." Nora turned. "Watching." "Watching," Cole confirmed. "That's the one who matters," she said. "The 6 with torches are the show. The one in the dark is taking notes." Caleb understood it then, the full architecture of what Voss was doing. Not an attack, an observation. Send 6 men with torches to a man's property at night, record his response, and use whatever happened next as evidence of instability of a man too volatile to be trusted with disputed land. It was the same logic as the cattle theft. The same logic as everything: create a situation, document the reaction, turn the reaction into the argument. "So we give him nothing to document," Caleb said. "We give him exactly one thing," Nora said. "We send for Loomis." Cole was already moving toward the door. "I'll go." "Take the back way," Nora said. "Don't let the man in the dark see you leave." Cole was gone before she finished the sentence. Caleb stood at the window and watched the 6 riders slow as they reached the edge of the property, pulling their horses to a stop just at the fence line, just close enough to be seen and felt, just far enough to claim they were on public land if anyone asked. The torches threw moving shadows across the yard. No one spoke, no one dismounted. Just presence, just pressure, just the cold, deliberate weight of being watched. "They're going to stay there," Nora said, "all night. Until they get a reaction, or until they get bored, whichever comes first." She moved away from the window. "Make coffee. Don't stand where they can see you watching them back." Caleb looked at her. "You want me to make coffee? I want you to do something with your hands other than hold that rifle." She met his eyes. "I know what it costs you to stand still right now. I know every instinct you have says to go out there and address this directly. But the man in the dark is counting on that instinct, and if you give it to him, you give him the narrative he came here to collect." She put her hand on his arm. "Make coffee. Let Loomis handle the rest." He made coffee. It was one of the harder things he'd done all week, and the week had contained multitudes. He moved in the kitchen and tried not to count the minutes, and listened to the silence outside, which was the particular silence of people doing something that required patience, and wasn't finished yet. 40 minutes after Cole left, Loomis arrived. Not alone. He'd brought both his deputies. The sick one had apparently recovered, or had been sufficiently motivated to recover, and Desmond, who Caleb suspected Cole had collected on the way. The sound of their horses coming from the south was different from the sound of the 6 men from the north, and Caleb felt the specific relief of a man who has been waiting for something and finally hears it arrive. He went to the door. Nora was already there. Loomis pulled up in the yard and looked at the riders on the fence line. They hadn't moved. The torches were burning lower now. The one in the dark had moved. Caleb could no longer see them from the window, and didn't know if that meant they'd gotten what they came for, or whether they were repositioning. "Those men on your line," Loomis said. "You know them." "No," Caleb said. "But I know who sent them." Loomis looked at Nora. "You sure about this?" "I'm sure that if you ride out there and ask them their business, they have no lawful answer to give you," she said. "They're on public land. You can't remove them for being on public land. But you can ask them to identify themselves, and if they refuse, you can document the refusal, and if they're carrying company equipment—" She paused. "Even a saddlebag with a mark on it that becomes part of your record." Loomis nodded slowly. Then he rode toward the fence line with his 2 deputies flanking him, and Caleb watched from the doorway as the conversation happened too far away to hear the sheriff's badge catching torchlight. The 6 riders looking at each other, a brief exchange, and then one by one the torches going out and the riders turning north and disappearing into the dark. When Loomis came back, he had a small notebook open in his hand. 4 of them gave names, he said. 2 refused. All 4 who gave names are listed as employees of the Voss Mining Company. Confirmed it from the payroll records Voss's own attorney filed with the county last year. He paused. One of them had a leather writing case in his saddlebag. I couldn't compel him to open it, but it was there. "The watcher in the dark?" Nora asked. Nora. "Gone by the time I arrived. Desmond tracked the hoof prints a quarter-mile north before losing them." Loomis looked at his notebook. Whoever it was, they were riding a horse with an unusual left rear shoe. Bent nail at the trailing edge. Distinctive mark. He looked at Nora. "Worth remembering." "Worth recording," she said. "Add it to the file." Loomis almost smiled. "You know, the first time you came into my office, I thought—" He stopped. "I know what you thought," Nora said. "It's all right." "I was wrong," he said, simply and directly, which Caleb suspected didn't come easily to the man. "I'll have the report filed by morning." After Loomis and his deputies rode out, Desmond stayed. He sat at the kitchen table and drank the coffee Caleb had made during the longest 40 minutes of recent memory, and he had the look of a man who'd been assembling a thought and was ready to say it. "They came tonight because the hearing was moved up," Desmond said. 9 days is not enough time for Voss to build his counter case if the documentation is as solid as Cole says. This was him trying to rattle the walls before the roof gets put on." "I know," Nora said. "Means he's worried. Means he's running out of moves that don't cost him something." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "Which also means the ones he has left will be more direct." Desmond looked at her. "How direct?" "I don't know yet. That's the part I've been wrong about before." She said it without drama, just honesty. "Edmund surprised me twice before I understood his pattern completely. I understood Voss faster, but faster doesn't mean completely." "What do we watch for?" Caleb said. "Tommy Reeves." She said it without hesitation. "He's the most vulnerable piece of what we've built. Without his testimony, we still have a strong case. With it, we have an airtight one. Voss knows the difference." She looked at Caleb. "Where is Tommy sleeping?" "His mother's place." "He needs to move. Tonight if possible. Somewhere Voss's people don't know." Desmond was already standing. "He can stay at my place. Nobody looks for ranch hands at my ranch." "Don't tell anyone," Nora said. "I wasn't born yesterday." Desmond put on his hat. "I'll have him moved in an hour." After he left, the house went quiet, in the way it did late at night, when everything that needed doing had been done, and what was left was just the waiting. Nora sat at the table with the coffee and the lamp and didn't open her notebook, which told Caleb more about how tired she actually was than anything she'd said. He sat down beside her, not across from her, beside her. The distinction felt important, and he didn't examine why. "You knew they were coming tonight," he said, not accusing, just noting. "I suspected. The inquiry agent in town this afternoon, the timing of Voss's arrival, it had the shape of something being set up." She looked at the table. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you spending the day waiting for it." "You could have told me." "I know." She looked at him. "I'm used to managing things alone. It's a habit I'm still breaking." A pause. "I'll tell you next time." "There won't be a next time," Caleb said. "After this hearing, Voss is finished in this valley." "Yes." She didn't look entirely certain when she said it, and he noticed. "But," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Men like Voss don't disappear when they lose. They regroup. They find another valley, another water table, another family. They can pressure in a different jurisdiction where nobody knows them yet." She looked at her hands. "What we're doing here doesn't stop what he is. It stops what he's doing here. That's not nothing. It's just not everything." Caleb sat with that. "Then what's everything?" "I don't know," she said. Cole mentioned the federal investigation. If that goes far enough, if it catches enough of what Voss has done across enough territories, that's closer to everything. She paused. "That's also years. And it's someone else's fight. Our fight is 9 days from now, in a Redstone Creek courtroom." She looked at him. "I try to keep those separate." He reached over and put his hand over hers. She didn't pull back. She turned her hand and held his the way she'd done in the kitchen 2 nights ago, and the feeling of it was the same, simple and solid and belonging to both of them. "Get some sleep," he said. "I will." She squeezed his hand once and let go. "You too." He did sleep, and it was the first real sleep he'd gotten in days, and in the morning everything moved faster. Cole arrived at the ranch before breakfast with a wire that had come overnight from a circuit court judge in Denver, not the territorial judge assigned to their hearing, but a federal one. The federal investigation had been acknowledged. A preliminary review had been opened. The wire used careful legal language, but the meaning was plain. Someone in Denver was paying attention. Cole handed the wire to Nora. She read it twice. "He filed first," she said. "Who filed first?" Caleb said. "Someone filed a complaint with the federal circuit before we did." She looked at Cole. "We didn't send anything to Denver yet." "No," Cole said. "We didn't." A pause while all 3 of them understood the same thing at the same time. "Tommy Reeves," Caleb said. "Not Tommy," Nora said slowly. Her expression was doing the thing it did when pieces were assembling fast. Tommy gave his statement to Cole. He didn't file anything independently. She looked at Cole. "The inquiry agent from yesterday, the one asking questions in town." Cole's eyes sharpened. "You think the inquiry agent was working for the federal circuit, not for Voss?" "I think the inquiry agent was asking questions about me, specifically about my history, my knowledge, my background with Edmund Cross. That's not the kind of research a man does when he's building a character attack. That's the kind of research a man does when he's deciding whether someone is a credible source." She set down the wire carefully. "Someone contacted the federal circuit before we did. Someone with specific knowledge of what we had and who was involved." "Harlan," Caleb said. Cole looked at him. "You filed something," Caleb said to Cole, "before you told us you were going to." Cole was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of a man who has been doing this long enough to know when to lead and when to follow, and is deciding which one this moment requires. "I sent a preliminary brief to a colleague in Denver the night I arrived," Cole said, "before I'd seen all the documentation. Based on what your wire described, Nora. I didn't mention it because I wasn't certain it would go anywhere, and I didn't want to raise expectations that wouldn't be met." He looked at them both. "It went somewhere." Nora looked at him for a long moment. "You should have told us." "Yes," Cole said. "I should have." Another pause. Then Nora said, "The federal acknowledgement changes the hearing." "It changes everything," Cole said. "A territorial judge ruling on a land case while a federal investigation is open is ruling with awareness that his decision will be reviewed. That changes his calculus significantly." "Voss's attorneys will know about the wire too," Caleb said. "They may already know," Nora said. "The inquiry agent." She looked at Caleb. "The inquiry agent with the distinctive horseshoe. We need to find out who he reported to." Loomis, when they reached him an hour later, had already pulled the report from the night before and was looking at it with the focused attention of a man who'd been turning something over since dawn. "The horseshoe mark," he said before they'd fully explained. "I've been thinking about it. There's only one farrier in a 100-mile radius who bends his nails that particular way. Old Swede named Olson works out of a town called Garfield 2 days east." He looked at Nora. "Had a man come through 3 weeks ago, paid in cash, wanted quick work. Olson mentioned it to his wife. His wife mentioned it to her sister. Her sister's husband was in my office yesterday about a fence dispute and said it in passing." He paused. "I went to see Olson this morning." "And?" Nora said. "The man who hired him gave a name that Olson didn't write down, but he described him, and the description matches a man who's been registered at Sutton's Hotel for the past 4 days under the name R. Calloway." Loomis looked at the report. "Not a local name. I checked the hotel registry this morning. R. Calloway signed in 3 days before Gerald Voss arrived." Nora went very still. "He was here before Voss," she said. 3 days before. Which means Voss didn't send him as a response to us." Caleb said it slowly, understanding spreading through the words as he spoke. "He was already here. He was here before the hearing was moved up, before Tommy gave his statement, before any of this. He was here when I arrived," Nora said. Her voice was completely flat. 3 days before Voss, the same week I stepped off the stage." She looked at Loomis. "Voss sent someone to watch Caleb's ranch before I'd been here long enough to do anything, before I'd filed a single document, before anyone outside this valley knew what I was." "Then Voss knew you were coming," Cole said. The words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Nora turned to face him. "How is that possible?" Cole opened his leather case and pulled out a document Caleb hadn't seen before. "I made some inquiries of my own this morning. The Kansas City agency that places mail-order brides, they operate legitimately, but they deal in information about the properties and situations of the men who contact them. That information is available as the agency sees fit to interested parties who pay for it." He looked at Nora. "Gerald Voss paid the agency for a profile of Caleb's situation 18 months ago. He received updates quarterly. The last update was 2 weeks before you arrived." The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room completely. "He knew Caleb had contacted the agency," Nora said. "He knew a candidate was being sent. He may not have known which one or what background she'd have, but he knew someone was coming." Cole paused. "The inquiry agent was here to assess whatever arrived, to find out quickly whether the person Caleb had sent for was a threat to his timeline." Caleb looked at Nora. She was looking at nothing in particular, that inward expression of someone running calculations at speed. "He decided I was a threat," she said, "which is why he moved faster than planned, which is why Edmund's affidavit was already prepared." She looked at Caleb. "He didn't accelerate because we surprised him. He accelerated because his inquiry agent told him I was a problem he needed to address before I could organize." "That means he knows everything we have," Caleb said. "He knows what his inquiry agent was able to observe and what the agency told him. He doesn't know about Tommy's formal statement. Tommy was moved before the agent could have made contact. He doesn't know about Cole's federal brief." She looked at Cole. "And he doesn't know about the second piece of documentation you haven't shown us yet." Cole looked at her. Something careful moved across his face. "What makes you think there's a second piece?" Because you came here this morning with a wire from a federal judge and the expression of a man who has more than one thing to say and is deciding the order. She met his eyes. What else did your colleague in Denver find? A pause. Then Cole reached into his leather case and pulled out a second document. Gerald Voss filed the same survey template in 4 other territories before Colorado, he said. My colleague found 3 cases. In 2 of them, the families sold before the case reached a judge. In the 3rd, he set the document on the table. The attorney who represented the landowners is now a federal circuit judge. He remembers the case. He remembers Voss specifically, and he has agreed to provide a written statement of his recollection of that case for submission to the court. Nora picked up the document. She read it. Her hands were steady, but her jaw had tightened in that small, controlled way. This is a pattern of conduct across multiple jurisdictions, she said. This isn't a land dispute anymore. This is a demonstrated criminal methodology. That's exactly what the federal brief argues, Cole said. And what the territorial judge will have in front of him when our hearing opens. Caleb looked at Cole. Why didn't you say all of this morning? Because I needed to see how Nora thought through the information about the inquiry agent first, Cole said. He said it simply without apology. I needed to know whether her reasoning held under surprise, whether she could receive unexpected information and integrate it without losing the thread. He paused. She can. Nora looked at him. That was a test. It was an assessment, Cole said. You'll be on a witness stand in 8 days. The opposing counsel will use surprise as a tool. I needed to know how you handle it. He held her gaze. You handle it well. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then, don't do it again. Understood, Cole said. And he meant it. That afternoon, Voss made his final move before the hearing, and it came from the direction none of them had anticipated. He came to the ranch himself. Not with riders. Not with attorneys. Alone in plain clothes on the gray horse in the middle of the afternoon, when the sky was clear, and anyone watching could see him arrive. Caleb saw him coming and stepped out of the barn with his rifle at his side. Not raised, just present. Voss pulled up 10 feet from the fence and stopped. He looked at Caleb with the expression of a man who has decided to try a different kind of conversation. No attorneys, he said. No documents. I came alone. I see that, Caleb said. It doesn't change much. I'd like 5 minutes. Nora appeared from the house before Caleb could answer. She stood beside him and looked at Voss with the flat, clear attention she gave to things that required full assessment. Mr. Voss, she said, you're welcome to speak. We'll listen. Voss dismounted. He held the reins in one hand and looked at both of them with something Caleb hadn't seen from him before. Not the performed warmth, not the cold certainty. Something more honest than either. Not quite humanity, but the recognition of it. The federal investigation, Voss said. I received word this morning. Then you understand the situation has changed, Nora said. I understand that a case that was manageable has become something else. He looked at Caleb. I want to offer a settlement, before the hearing. Full withdrawal of the survey claim, restoration of your cattle payment of documented damages across all 5 ranches, and a formal agreement that Voss Mining Company will not pursue any land action in this valley for a period of 20 years. The yard was very quiet. Caleb looked at Nora. She was looking at Voss with the careful expression of someone hearing an offer they haven't finished evaluating. Why? She said. Voss looked at her. Because a federal investigation is expensive and damaging in ways that a territorial hearing is not. Because my company has other interests in other territories that benefit from a clean legal record. Because... He paused, and something moved across his face that might in another man have been called regret. Because the attorney who just agreed to provide a federal statement was the same man who represented the family in the 4th Territory. The one case I didn't believe would ever resurface. He looked at the ground briefly. I was wrong about that. You're not sorry for what you did, Nora said, not accusatory, just clear. "I'm sorry it became unmanageable," Voss said. "That's the honest answer. I know it's not the one you want." "It's the true one," she said, "which I prefer to the alternatives." She looked at Caleb. "What do you want to do?" Caleb stood in the yard of his ranch on a cold October afternoon and looked at the man who'd spent 18 months trying to take it from him and thought about what the right answer was. Not the satisfying one. The right one. "I want the settlement in writing," he said, "witnessed by Cole and by Loomis. I want Tommy Reeves's name cleared of any connection to Voss's operation in the formal record. I want a public statement from Voss Mining Company acknowledging that the survey filing was without merit." He met Voss's eyes. "And I want Edmund Cross's affidavit formally withdrawn, in writing, with his name on it." Voss was quiet for a moment. "Edmund is in Chicago." "Then get him on a wire," Nora said. "You have 8 days." Voss looked at her for a long moment. The man who'd arrived in a Denver carriage a week ago, like a king looking at territory he'd already decided was his, was still visible underneath, but further back, less certain of the ground he stood on. "All right," he said. He remounted without another word and rode north, and Caleb watched him go with the complicated feeling of a man who has wanted something for a long time and is now standing in the moment of getting it and discovering it feels different than he'd expected. Not smaller, just more serious, more real. "Do we trust it?" he said. "No," Nora said. "We go to the hearing anyway as if the settlement isn't coming. We prepare exactly as we planned. And if the settlement documents arrive and are exactly what you asked for," she paused, "then we accept them and the hearing becomes the formal record that makes it permanent. And if they're not exactly what I asked for, then Cole stands up in that courtroom and we win a different way." She looked at him. "Either way, we win." Caleb looked at her. The woman who'd arrived on a stage 10 days ago with a trunk and a compass, and the fierce, quiet conviction of someone who'd decided what she was worth and wasn't negotiating it downward. "How are you so sure?" he said. She looked back at him with those dark eyes that had taken his measure the first moment she'd seen him, and had apparently liked what they found. "Because we built something that's true," she said. "And true things hold Caleb. That's not faith. That's just how it works." He believed her. He'd been believing her, he realized, since the second morning since she'd walked into his kitchen with his map and her notebook and started making things visible that he'd been too close to see. He'd just been slow to admit that believing her was the same as trusting himself again. He wasn't slow about it anymore. Cole arrived that evening with the amended settlement documents in hand, transmitted by wire from Voss's Denver attorney, with a speed that indicated either genuine urgency or very efficient legal staff. Cole read them 3 times, made 2 small corrections that Voss's attorney accepted within the hour, and by 9 that evening, the documents were signed and witnessed and filed with both Loomis and the county clerk. Edmund Cross's written retraction arrived by morning wire. Nora held it in both hands and read it twice without speaking. Then she set it down on the kitchen table and looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone closing a door they'd been holding half open for a long time. "All right," she said. "Just that." "All right," Caleb said back. Tommy Reeves, when told that his name had been formally cleared, and that his testimony had contributed to a settlement that protected every ranch in the valley, sat in Desmond's kitchen and put his face in his hands for a moment that wasn't entirely composed. Then he straightened up and said he'd be at Caleb's ranch Monday at 6 if the offer of work still stood. It stood. The hearing 3 days later was a formality, and the most important formality any of them had ever attended. Every rancher from the valley came. Their wives came. Ruth Calloway was in the front row with her arms crossed and an expression that dared anyone to try anything. Desmond sat with Bill Aldrich and the Beaumont brothers and Old Man Garrett, all of them in good coats. All of them wearing the faces of men who understood that the day mattered, even if the outcome was already decided. Wade Loomis sat near the back. He'd filed every report Nora had asked him to file, signed every document Cole had put in front of him, and had been doing his job for 12 days straight, with a consistency that was partly conscience and partly. Caleb suspected the experience of watching Nora Shaw hold him to a standard he'd set for himself a long time ago and had quietly let slide. Voss arrived with his 2 attorneys and sat at the opposing table with the contained stillness of a man who had accepted a loss but had not yet made peace with it. His face was composed. His hands were still. He looked straight ahead. Cole presented the case in 2 hours. The settlement was entered into the record. The federal investigation was formally acknowledged. The territorial judge, a deliberate man with the careful expression of someone reading a room and finding it has already made up its mind, reviewed the documentation, asked 3 specific questions that Cole answered with the precision of a man who'd been preparing for exactly those 3 questions, and called a brief recess that lasted 20 minutes. When he came back, he was carrying the decision already written. The boundary survey was invalidated. The preliminary inquiry filings were struck from the record as part of a documented pattern of fraudulent legal action. The settlement terms were entered as a binding territorial order. The federal investigation was confirmed as ongoing with full cooperation required from Voss Mining Company. The room erupted. Caleb sat very still in the noise and heard it the way he'd heard important things before, slightly distanced the way the mind protects itself from things too large to absorb all at once. He felt Nora's hand find his under the table. He held on. Voss left without speaking. At the door, he turned and looked across the room directly at Caleb. The expression on his face was not rage and not humiliation. It was the particular cold recognition of a man who has encountered something he didn't calculate for and is filing it away. Caleb held his gaze without moving. Voss left, and then the room was just the people of Redstone Creek, and the noise was just relief, and the valley that had been afraid for 2 years was remembering what it felt like not to be. The celebration that followed the hearing was the spontaneous kind, which was the only kind worth having. Ruth Calloway produced a bottle from somewhere inside her coat before the judge had finished gathering his papers, and the back room of her general store became for one evening the social center of Redstone Creek. Ranchers who'd been separately afraid for months stood in the same room and discovered in the discovery of their shared story something that had been absent from this valley for 2 years, the particular strength of people who finally know they're not alone. Bill Aldrich shook Nora's hand for a long time and didn't say much, which from Bill was the equivalent of a speech. The Beaumont brothers brought their wives who thanked Nora with the specific quiet gratitude of women who'd watched their families being ground down and hadn't known how to stop it. Old man Garrett, who hadn't left his property in 3 months, stood near the door with a glass of whiskey and kept looking around the room like a man relearning the size of his world. Tommy Reeves came to Caleb quietly near the end of the evening. He was still pale, still carrying the look of someone in the middle of reckoning with himself, but something in him had straightened in the last week. Something that had been bent was working its way back. "I know I don't have the right to ask for much," Tommy said, "but I meant what I said about Monday." 6 o'clock, Caleb said. "Don't be late." Tommy nodded. He looked like he might say something else. Then he decided not to, which was exactly the right call, and Caleb respected him more for it. Desmond found Caleb near the back of the room and stood beside him the way Desmond stood beside everything solid without ceremony, without needing to make the moment larger than it already was. "She's something," Desmond said. "Yes." "You going to do right by her?" Already asked. Desmond looked at him sidelong. "She said yes. She said yes." A pause. Desmond raised his glass. "Good," he said, which from Desmond was the equivalent of a standing ovation, a brass band, and a speech from the governor. Nora appeared at Caleb's shoulder near the end of the evening with her notebook tucked away for the first time in 2 weeks, and her coat on, and her face carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who has been running on purpose and urgency, and has just felt both of them release all at once. "Ready," she said. "Ready?" They rode home under a sky full of stars, and the silence between them was the best kind. The kind that doesn't need filling, because everything that needed saying had already been said, and what was left was just the 2 of them, and the road, and the cold, clean Colorado air. The mountains held their snow. The ranch came into view around the last bend, and Caleb looked at it the way he hadn't looked at it in years. Not as a problem to be managed, not as evidence of everything he'd lost and was still trying to hold together. Just home. His home. Theirs. Cole was leaving on the morning stage. He came to the ranch just after dawn, leather case in hand, hat on, looking like a man who'd done what he came to do and was content with the result. He shook Caleb's hand with the same grip as the first day, and then he turned to Nora and studied her for a moment with the particular attention of a man who wants to say something precisely. "You have a genuinely extraordinary mind for this work," he said. "I've been practicing law for 30 years. I've worked with trained attorneys who couldn't build a case the way you built this one. The documentation, the pattern recognition, the Whitmore precedent, all of it." He paused. "I know 3 people in Denver who would take you as a student without hesitation. If you ever want formal training, the offer stands." Nora was very still. It was the kind of stillness that appeared when something landed in a place she'd stopped expecting things to reach. Caleb watched it happen, watched her absorb those words with the careful private attention of a woman who had spent years being underestimated and had not yet fully learned to receive the opposite. "Thank you," she said. She said it simply without deflecting, which Caleb knew cost her something. Cole shook her hand. Then he picked up his case and walked to the waiting stage without looking back, which was also exactly the right call. Caleb and Nora stood in the yard and watched the stage pull away, and then the yard was quiet, and the morning was cold, and there was work to be done. "Cole meant it," Caleb said. "I know." She was still looking at the road where the stage had been. "Denver's 2 days by stage." She turned to look at him. Her eyes were steady and dark and completely clear. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that what you did here, the documentation, the Whitmore precedent, walking into that courtroom and holding your ground, that's not something most people can do, trained or otherwise." He held her gaze. "I'm saying that if there's more of that in you that needs room to grow, I don't want to be the reason it doesn't happen." Nora looked at him for a long moment, long enough that he wasn't sure what was coming next. Then something in her face settled, not the practical settling, not the strategic settling. The deep kind. The kind that comes from a decision that's already been made at a level below conscious thought and is only now being spoken aloud. "I'm not going to Denver," she said. "Not now. Maybe not ever." "Nora, let me finish." She stepped toward him. "Cole's offer means more than I can tell you. Hearing that from a man like him after everything, it means something I don't have words for yet." She looked at him directly. "But what I want is here. I want this ranch. I want this valley. I want to be the person these ranchers call when the next Voss shows up, and there will be a next one, Caleb, not him. But the thing he represents doesn't disappear because one man loses a court case." "I know that," he said. "Then you know this valley needs someone who knows how to fight it." She held his gaze without flinching. "I want to be that person, here, with you." A breath. "That's the life I want. I've never wanted anything more clearly." Caleb looked at her. This woman who'd arrived 10 days ago on a stagecoach with a trunk and a medical bag and a compass and a notebook, and the fierce, relentless conviction of someone who'd decided what she was worth and wasn't negotiating it down for anyone. "Stop trying to give me an exit," she said. "I don't want one." He reached out and took her hand. "I wasn't trying to give you an exit," he said. "I was trying to make sure you knew you had a choice. I know I have a choice." She laced her fingers through his. "I'm making it." That was enough. It was more than enough. The next weeks moved with the particular quality of time that has stopped being urgent and started being real. The federal investigation proceeded in Denver with Cole as lead counsel, and Tommy Reeves's testimony filed and sealed. The settlement payments from Voss arrived on schedule. Nora checked the amounts against her ledger with the focused precision she brought to everything and confirmed they were exact. The cooperative feed arrangement she'd been sketching since week 2 began to take formal shape with Bill Aldrich as the first partner and the Beaumont brothers signing on before the month was out. Garrett came to the ranch one afternoon, unannounced, which was unprecedented for a man who'd barely left his property in months. He sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee and didn't say much, which was his way. But before he left, he pressed a folded piece of paper into Nora's hand, a written account of his incidents with Voss, documented in the careful, unpracticed handwriting of a man who'd never had reason to write things down before and had decided to start. "In case it's useful," he said. "It will be," she told him. After he wrote out, she sat at the table and looked at the paper for a moment without opening her notebook. Then she looked at Caleb and said, "He wrote this out himself. Last night, probably. It took him hours." "I know. That's not nothing." "No," he said. "That's everything." Tommy Reeves showed up Monday at 10 minutes to 6, which told Caleb most of what he needed to know about how this was going to go. He worked hard and without complaint, and asked good questions, and made exactly one mistake in the first week, a fence post set wrong at the east corner. And when Caleb corrected him, he fixed it without argument and did the next 10 correctly, which was all Caleb had ever asked of anyone. By the second week, Nora had him keeping the secondary livestock records, which he did with the careful, slightly startled attention of a man discovering he was better at something than he'd expected to be. The ledger Nora had started on her second day at the ranch now covered 3 months of detailed records and had already identified 2 expenditure patterns that Caleb hadn't known were bleeding him dry. She'd reorganized the supply, ordering established a credit arrangement with the general store that saved him 15%, and had begun corresponding with a cattlemen's association in Denver about regional pricing benchmarks. Ruth Calloway, who had been watching all of this from her position as the general store and the unofficial information clearinghouse of Redstone Creek, stopped Caleb one morning when he came in for supplies and said without preamble, "That woman is the best thing that's happened to this valley in 20 years. "I know," Caleb said. "I told you she was going to cause you trouble." "You did. I was wrong about the kind of trouble." Ruth handed him his supplies with the brisk efficiency of a woman who has said what she needed to say and is done with the subject. "Don't tell her I said that." "She already knows," Caleb said. "She knows everything, Ruth." Ruth made a sound that might have been a laugh and turned back to her counter. The morning of the third week, Caleb woke before dawn and lay still in the dark for a moment listening. The stove wasn't going yet. The house was quiet in a way that meant Nora was still asleep, which was unusual enough that he noticed it. He lay there in the dark and listened to the Colorado wind move off the mountains, and thought about a word he'd written to an agency 4 months ago. Plain. He'd meant it when he wrote it. He'd meant every careful, deliberate, self-protective word of that letter. He'd been looking for something that wouldn't cost him anything he couldn't afford to lose, and he'd been so sure that was wisdom. He understood now that it wasn't wisdom. It was fear wearing wisdom's clothes. And the difference between them was the woman asleep on the other side of a bedroom that no longer had a blanket hanging across the doorway because there was no longer any reason for one. He got up and started the stove. He made coffee. He stood at the window and looked at his land. All of it the full width and length of it. The northwest section that Nora had ridden and mapped and found water sources in that he hadn't known were there. The north fence line that Tommy had helped him rebuild stronger than it was before. The south pasture where the herd was settled and the gray mare moved without favoring her right front, because she'd had 3 days of rest and cold compresses and Nora's particular brand of stubborn, thorough care. He heard her before he saw her, the quiet sound of movement from the bedroom. Unhurried and unrushed, someone waking up at the pace that felt right rather than the pace that urgency demanded. That alone told him something about how much had changed. In the first 10 days she'd been here, Nora Shaw had never once woken up at a pace that felt right. She'd woken up at the pace the situation required, and not a minute later. She came into the main room with her hair down, and her coat not yet on, and her feet in the thick wool socks she wore around the house on cold mornings, and she looked at him, standing at the window with the coffee he'd made. And something in her face was different from the face she wore when the work was active and the stakes were high. Softer, not weaker. Just the version of herself she allowed when the doors were closed and there was nobody to be useful for and nothing to prove. "You let me sleep," she said. "You needed it." "That wasn't your call." "It was absolutely my call." He turned from the window and handed her the coffee. "You've slept 4 hours a night for 2 weeks. The case is done. The settlement is paid. The federal investigation is running without us. You get to sleep." She took the coffee and looked at him over the rim. "You're going to make a habit of this." "Probably. Making decisions about when I sleep. Making coffee before you're awake," he said. "That's all. The sleeping is your own business." She almost smiled. It happened faster now than it had in the first week, the smile breaking through the composure without her having to decide to let it. He liked that. He liked knowing he'd had something to do with it. She sat down at the table and he sat across from her, and they drank their coffee in the quiet of the early morning and didn't need to fill it with anything because they were past the point where silence between them needed managing. Then she said, "I've been thinking about Cole's offer." He waited. "Not about going to Denver," she said. "I meant what I told you. That's not what I want." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "But there's a version of what Cole offered that doesn't require going to Denver. The law statutes I read in Kansas City, the federal precedents, the filing methodology, none of that requires a formal degree to be useful. What it requires is practice and access and cases to work on." She looked at him. "This valley is going to have more cases. Not just land fraud, tenant disputes, water rights inheritance questions, things that people here have been handling badly or not handling at all, because there's no one within 50 miles who understands the legal mechanisms." "You want to practice law," Caleb said. "I want to be useful in the way I'm actually useful," she said. "Not in a way that requires me to be something I'm not." She met his eyes. "Cole would correspond with me. He said as much before he left without saying it directly, which is how he says most things." She paused. "Would that work for you, the time it would take? The people coming to the ranch? The Nora?" He said her name, the way he'd learned to say it, not to stop her, just to bring her attention to the fact that she didn't need to justify this to him. "Yes, obviously yes." She looked at him for a moment. "You didn't even think about it." "I thought about it in about 2 seconds, and the answer was yes. Some things don't take longer than that." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't know it could be like this." "Like what? Like someone just—" She paused, searching for the word and not finding one that satisfied her, which was rare. "Someone just being on your side, without conditions, without it costing you something to ask for things." Caleb put down his coffee. "It doesn't cost you anything to ask me for things." "I know that now." She looked at him steadily. "I didn't know it was possible before." He didn't have a response to that. That was adequate, so he didn't try to find one. He just looked at her across the kitchen table in the early morning and felt the full weight of what they'd built in 3 weeks. Not just the case, not just the settlement, not just the cooperative and the ledger and the Northwest water sources. All of it, the whole shape of what a life could look like when 2 people with the same kind of stubbornness and the same kind of damage decided to point themselves in the same direction. The county clerk's office on the 3rd Thursday of November was a small room that had never held this many people and was learning about its own capacity the hard way. Every rancher from the valley had come. Desmond stood near the window with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who had decided something in the night many weeks ago and had never once reconsidered it. Bill Aldrich stood at the back trying to look casual about the fact that he was crying, which was not a look Bill Aldrich was built for and which made it somehow more honest. Old man Garrett was there in his good coat, standing straight in a way that said he'd made a decision about what kind of man he was going to be from here on and had dressed accordingly. Ruth Calloway was in the front row. She was wearing her good hat. Tommy Reeves stood near the door with the careful, hopeful expression of a young man rebuilding his understanding of what he was capable of, and finding with some surprise that it was more than he'd thought. The judge asked Caleb if he'd take this woman without reservation. "Without a single one," Caleb said. which was not the standard phrasing, but was the most honest thing he'd said in 7 years, and the judge had the good sense to accept it. The judge asked Nora if she'd take this man. "I already have," she said. "But yes." Ruth Calloway produced a handkerchief from somewhere inside her coat. Desmond looked at the ceiling with great interest. Bill Aldrich stopped pretending he wasn't crying. Outside, the Colorado winter held the valley in its particular white stillness. The mountains stood where they'd always stood, patient and permanent, and indifferent to everything that happened in their shadow, the way things are that outlast all human trouble. But inside that small room and on the road home, with their breath-making clouds in the cold air and their hands interlaced across the space between their horses, and in all the months that followed, as the valley rebuilt itself from fear into something stronger as the ranch grew, as the cooperative fed 5 families through a hard winter, as Nora's correspondence with Cole produced 3 more resolved cases, and 1 federal ruling that would matter to landowners in 4 territories for the next 20 years. In all of it, Caleb and Nora Hardin built what they had both come to this valley needing most. Not safety, not simplicity, not a life without trouble. A life where trouble met its match and the match held, and neither of them ever faced any of it alone again. He had written to an agency asking for plane. He had received instead the one person in the world built to stand exactly where she was standing beside him in the cold, in the difficult and beautiful and demanding life he'd made. Holding her half of everything with both hands, and not once asking it to be something easier than it was. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.